Chapter 1394. The 3,500 dark cavalry quickly left a battlefield strewn with corpses. Behind them were waves of thick smoke from the burning of provisions. This was already the 5th time the dark cavalry had helped Northern Mang light up the smoke signal outside the gourd. 14,000 Beimang soldiers and auxiliary soldiers had been killed, and nearly 200,000 cattle and sheep had been scattered. The northernmost part of the Phantom Cavalry's tracks was actually already in Longyao province. Then they quickly headed south. In the battle just now, the Phantom Cavalry had not taken the initiative to attack, but Beimang's interception. Beimang had used the lives of 2,000 ordinary Phantom Cavalry soldiers to determine the location of the elite Phantom Cavalry, thereby reducing the Phantom Cavalry's room to maneuver. It was likely that the main cavalry forces of Longyao province would soon hear the news and move. While retreating, Yu Luandao suddenly raised his head and saw 2 birds chasing each other in the sky. At the same time, Su Fengyan pulled out an arrow from his quiver and pulled the bowstring back like a full moon. The arrowhead slowly deviated as the Gerfalcon and Beimang peregrine falcon soared. When the peregrine falcon was forced to lower its altitude to flee for its life, Su Fengyan shot out an arrow and killed it on the spot. The great inertia knocked the peregrine falcon into the clouds, and the extraordinarily handsome 6-year phoenix soared into the sky. Under everyone's gaze, the Gerfalcon pierced through the clouds and charged towards Su Fengyan. Its 2 claws hooked onto the peregrine falcon's body and gently tossed it down. It circled a few times above its master's head before disappearing in a flash. Su Fengyan tossed away the peregrine falcon's body and put the arrow back into the quiver on the left side of his saddle. The light crossbows were of excellent quality, but after a great battle, heavy crossbows often couldn't bear the burden, still easily damaged in large amounts. Even though the light crossbows the underworld cavalry carried were more durable than heavy crossbows, after 5 cavalry battles, regardless of whether it was the crossbow itself or the crossbow bolts, there weren't many left. That was why they had no choice but to switch out the Northern Mang cavalry bows they obtained after the battle. Su Fengyan and Yu Luandao both used iron bows with heavy Western shoe craftsman's imprints. Yu Luandao looked around worriedly. If it weren't for the fact that they could use battle to support battle, or even if the Beimang cavalry didn't come to surround them, his cavalry would have already collapsed. Previously, when they ran for 500 li from Ji province, it wasn't that the cavalry couldn't withstand it. Even though they had 2 horses at the time, the war horses were still in a miserable state. Long-distance raids pursued speed and the element of surprise. However, since it was long distance, the cavalry could rely on their perseverance to hold on. But the war horses couldn't. Especially since it wasn't autumn and the horses weren't fat enough. Beiliang's horse management officials weren't immortals, so they couldn't change this reality. Later on, after a short rest, they rushed for another 600 li to the outside of the gourd. Fortunately, they had captured Beimang warhorses at the time to minimize this invisible battle damage. However, after 5 consecutive large-scale cavalry battles with short intervals, even if the warhorses could still be rotated, at this stage the cavalry, who were rushing from one battlefield to another at top speed, couldn't hold on any longer. As for why they didn't show any signs of fatigue, Yu Luandao subconsciously glanced at Su Fengyan beside him. Yu Luandao withdrew his gaze and turned to look at the faces around him. This young commander was filled with pride. For 10,000 Phantom Cavalry to fight to this extent, even with Yu Luandao's cold temperament, it was enough to make him proud. Killing more than 14,000 enemies was not strange. The cavalry that Beimang sent to escort the supplies were all 2nd- or 3rd-rate fighting forces in the border towns of the southern court. 2 of the cavalry battles, from the beginning to the end, had been a one-sided slaughter. However, the supply line between Longyao province and the Gourd Pass had been mostly paralyzed, and in the end, they had involved at least 10,000 of Beimang's elite cavalry, and had been led around in circles by several thousand cavalry. This was the greatest achievement of Yu Luandao and the Phantom Cavalry. As the cavalry headed south, Su Fengyan, who had been escorting the wounded Phantom Cavalry away with Fan Shaochai and Mi Fengjie, said softly, "We've pulled our bow too tightly." Yu Luandao nodded. Right now, the difficult part is finding a place to stop. Since the 2 young commanders in the east known as the Zhuobo and Zhuobo have also set out, it's no longer possible for us to retreat east. Besides, His Highness has also said that our spies have already shown that Yang Yuanzhan has ordered Hong Jingyan to lead half of the Ruran cavalry out of the Gourd Pass to block our path south. Yu Luandao looked to the west. Go west? That was the northern front of Liangzhou province, where the Beimang's main force, commanded by King Dongjue of the southern courtyard, was currently attacking Hutu City. Both sides had a total of 700,000 soldiers. If they went there, they would be walking right into the northern Mang barbarians' trap. Not to mention the remaining 3,500 cavalry. Even if they had 35,000 cavalry, without the support of their own army, they wouldn't be enough for the northern Mang barbarians to wrap up dumplings. Even if Yu Luandao encountered the Tuzhuabo or Hong Jingyan's Ruran cavalry, even if all the phantom cavalry under his command were to die in battle, he would not go west. Su Fengnian also looked to the west, seemingly waiting for someone. Su Fengnian was waiting for the leader of the horse bandits, Song Diaoer. This 1,000-strong horse bandits had been secretly recruited by Huang Fujin. While they might not be able to change the overall situation in Yuzhou, they could at least give Yu Luandao's Yuzhou cavalry a breather. The phantom cavalry was like an exhausted martial arts grandmaster. If they could get a breath of fresh air, they could still fight. If they could not even get a breath of fresh air, they would be completely exhausted. The reason why Su Fengnian did not say this was not because he wanted to give this cavalry a surprise, but because he did not dare to have too much hope for Song Diaoer, whom he had only met once. If not for the fact that there were Beiliang experts hiding in Song Diaoer's horse bandits, Su Fengnian would not even have let Song Diaoer lead the way. Putting himself in Song Diaoer's shoes, it was the same no matter who the horse bandits chose to side with. Beimang currently had the upper hand. If Song Diaoer wanted to rebel and use the 3,500 Yuzhou cavalry as proof of his allegiance, Yang Yuanzhan, who had been tormented badly by Yu Luandao's cavalry, would probably not be stingy with a single general. In Su Fengnian's view, it would be strange if Song Diaoer, who had been born into a landowning household of the Southern Dynasty, did not have any ulterior motives and stood on Beiliang's side from beginning to end. As for what the truth was, Su Fengnian could only judge after meeting with Song Diaoer's messenger. If Song Diaoer did not dare to come personally and was not in the group, then Su Fengnian could only regard this chess piece as having changed its colors. Then Yu Luandao and the phantom cavalry, who had nowhere to run, were fated to fight to the death with the two great Jinbo cavalry or the Ruran cavalry. And Su Fengnian would go alone to find Song Diaoer, since he could have Beiliang and Huang Fujin bring the horse bandits outside the pass to Song Diaoer to dominate. Then Su Fengnian could personally take it back. Rather than give hope and then disappoint, it was better not to say anything at all. Su Fengnian asked, "How many of Fan Fan's scouts are left?" Yu Luandao said bitterly, "Originally, there were less than 60 old scouts. Behind them, more than 800 cavalry have taken their place, barely maintaining the number of 400 scouts. Therefore, it can be said that Captain Fan's losses are the greatest. There is nothing that can be done. Fighting outside the pass as a scout, he will definitely die at the very front." Yu Luandao pursed his cracked and bleeding lips, a smile appearing on his face. He said in a hoarse voice, "However, we have not fought these battles for nothing. Compared to before we left Yuzhou, the battle strength of the 3,500 cavalry has increased greatly. As long as we can breathe a sigh of relief, we can completely recover. Against the Ruran cavalry of the same strength as Hong Jingyan, we dare to say that we can win. Before this, who in Yuzhou, which was only known for its infantry, would have such thoughts? If these 3,500 people can return to Yuzhou alive, it will definitely be of great benefit to the entire Yuzhou war." Deputy Generals Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao both had subtle expressions, not daring to speak. They were afraid that Su Fengnian would misunderstand the main general's words and misunderstand that the Ruran cavalry was complaining about their awkward situation. Yu Luandao suddenly laughed and said cheerfully, "After this mess, not only will the Dragon's Waste, Hushi, and Tangerine prefectures suffer great losses, their vitality will also be greatly damaged. I'm afraid that the northern grasslands will also continue to lose meat. Those big factions that Tuoba Bodhisattva had suppressed with great difficulty might start to stir again. They originally had objections to attacking Beiliang first. In the eyes of these fellows who would not act until they saw the hair, Who would be willing to attack a place that only had hard bones and no fat meat? How could it compare to attacking the Ji prefecture that had no military strength? As long as they passed Ji prefecture, it would be the rich central plains with thousands of miles of fertile land. Countless gold, silver, and people would be snatched until their hands went numb. Otherwise, attacking the two Liao prefectures would be fine too. As long as they could defeat Gu Jiantang, they would be driving south and besieging the city. Not to mention how many enemies we have killed on this trip to the Calabash Mouth, we can definitely make Dong Zhuo and the Taiping Commandery, who insist on attacking Beiliang first and then attacking the Central Plains, gnash their teeth in hatred. Perhaps they are stomping their feet and cursing at us right now? Chapter 1395. Su Wenyao lowered his head and checked the arrows in the quiver one by one. They were all made of dense hardwood and the arrowheads were very heavy. However, compared to Beiliang's arrows, there were still some slight differences. However, on the whole, they belonged to the same type of arrow. These two were like close relatives, and could be said to be two completely different types from the many bows and arrows in the Liang border. The latter focused more on shooting range, shooting speed, and adhered to the 3 strikes before facing the enemy in ancient military books. This was not because the latter had taken a different path. It was just that the battles in the interior were mostly infantrymen versus infantrymen, so the speed of advancement was naturally slower than the cavalry charge. As for the former, even if Liang Mang's arrows were supported by the outstanding strength of the northern warriors, they still only sought the 4 words, death by breaking armor. In fact, the Beimang cavalry did not embark on this extreme path in the beginning. It was only because of the 20 years of confrontation that they were seriously affected by the superior armor of the Beiliang. Otherwise, with Beimang's superb horsemanship and archery, they could often exhaust the enemy to death like flying kites when facing most of the other Liang border army. Su Wenyao casually threw away 2 arrows that had cracks on their shafts. After hearing the main General Yu Luandao's humorous words, he laughed softly and raised his head. He said, "Those Ziches are not really stupid. They know that if they don't take down Beiliang, all their talk about going south from Ji province and conquering the Central Plains and fighting all the way to Taiyan City is fake. How many people do we have? We've already made their supply lines chaotic. If the entire Beiliang border army is left unattended, what will happen to the southern dynasty? Perhaps even the Beimang palace will be destroyed by us. However, logic is logic. As individuals, they all hope to do less and gain more. If the Beimang bigwigs want to attack Ji province and Liaodong, I, Su Wenyao, can't wait for so many of them. How many fewer people will die in our Beiliang?" Shi Yulu nodded and said in a low voice, "Fatty Dong and that Taiping order really deserve to die." The chief scout officer Fan Fan suddenly arrived on horseback, reporting the military situation to the officers. 30 li to the south, there are 800 cavalry. Their armor is even better than the northern Mang cavalry we encountered before. They should be the vanguard that withdrew from the Gourd. From the looks of it, if we continue to head south, we will encounter 2 or 3 more of these small cavalry groups at most, and then we will encounter the Ruran cavalry very quickly. Yu Luandao put on a fake smile. His handsome face was filled with the viciousness that had been accumulating for a long time. He said ferociously, "Let's not care about the Ruran cavalry first. It's a waste not to eat the bait. Let's eat these 800 cavalrymen first." 2. When fighting an enemy force of only 800 riders, there were ways to fight 800, and when fighting 8,000, there were also ways to fight 8,000. Right now, Yu Luandao didn't have more than 3,500 hidden cavalry, so everything had to be done in a proper manner. It was because in the end, hidden cavalry's enemies, apart from the northern Mang cavalry on the surface, were also hidden cavalry themselves. Yu Luandao had to take into consideration the stamina, spirit, war horses, and crossbows of his own soldiers. Now, the phantom cavalry's sense of archery had reached its peak. However, if they continued fighting for too long, it would also lead to irreversible side effects. This meant that the phantom cavalry could only fight a 3-pronged battle. They had to quickly finish off the enemy with the least number of charges, quickly withdraw from the battlefield, and quickly enter a safe area to rest and reorganize. After receiving the military intelligence from Fan Fan, the main force of the phantom cavalry began to slow down. The front line was divided into 3 layers. Su Wenyao, who was bottom in the previous battle, led 1,000 cavalry in the front. Yu Luandao led 1,000 cavalry in the middle. Shi Yulu's 1,000 cavalry escorted a large number of horses to bring up the rear. Fan Fan's 400 scouts, who had the most horsepower, began to attack first. They circled in front of the left flank to prevent any stragglers from escaping. What Yu Luandao wanted to do was to use the advantage of numbers to split up the multiple charges that were equivalent to launching at the same time, trying to take away the 800 cavalry with 3 brushes. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would not let his subordinates charge back and forth. The war horses of the phantom cavalry could not hold on any longer, and so could the tenacious cavalrymen. They had given up on the heavy weapons that were more powerful but cumbersome, and mainly used sabers to fight the light cavalry. Even though both sides were prepared to die, there would not be too many corpses left behind at the line of death where both sides met. However, under the order of Yu Luandao, apart from the battle outside Silver Harrier City in north of Ji, in all the other 6 battles, big and small, outside the mouth of the gourd, the light cavalry of Yuzhou were ordered to kill during the charge. The price of such an order was to kill and be killed. Only a few of them were lightly wounded, but many of them were severely wounded. The most secretive and cold-blooded part of Yu Luandao's strategy was that, besides the fact that it was easy for the phantom cavalry to secure the victory right from the beginning, there were not many wounded cavalrymen who left the main force after the battle and retreated to the east. Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao were well aware of this, and so were the captains and officers. However, no one objected to it and no one questioned it. No matter how soul-stirring the poems from the frontier fortress were, they could not describe the cruelty of the battlefield where everyone was forced to commit suicide. Each man of Yuzhou cavalry rode 3 horses. Which of the war horses did not carry the sabers of their fallen comrades? Regarding this kind of extra burden, no matter how cold-hearted Yu Luandao was, and no matter how strict he was about the details, he could not bear to control it. Outside the battlefield where the killing had yet to begin, a group of 5 Beimang cavalrymen rode in the opposite direction of the 800 cavalrymen. They were rushing south at top speed, trying to send the important information to the main force in the south that they had encountered the Yuzhou cavalry. Suddenly, an inconspicuous little black dot that had bypassed the main battlefield appeared from the rear flank. This figure was running as fast as thunder, much faster than the war horses. He made a semicircle and blocked the path of the 5 cavalrymen. Both of his feet stepped on the yellow sand and kicked up a cloud of dust. The 5 cavalrymen were stunned by this strange scene. 100 paces in front of them stood a thin and weak child with a Bailiang saber on his back. When he was 20 steps away from the leading horse, the child who appeared and disappeared mysteriously had already dodged 4 arrows. He leaped high into the air and caught the last arrow that was aimed at his chest. He punched the warhorse's head with his fist. The warhorse's head exploded and its front legs were broken. The warhorse was almost flipped upside down by the punch. The squad leader jumped in front of the warhorse, but his chest was hit by the child's fist. He directly knocked the warhorse behind him out of the way. The 3rd rider's throat was pierced by the child's arrow, and he fell off his horse and died. The 2 squads on the left and right who had dodged the attack did not dare to continue fighting. They spurred their horses and charged forward. The child turned around and ran wildly. He caught up with a cavalryman and grabbed the tail of a warhorse with both hands. His feet steadied, and the galloping warhorse's hooves came to a halt. Its tail was broken, and it neighed in pain as it desperately tried to speed up. The child rushed out with a single step, standing shoulder to shoulder with that warhorse. With a casual sweep of his fist, he struck the warhorse's abdomen, sending the northern Mang scout on its back flying along with the warhorse. That scout, whose feet didn't leave the stirrups in time, fell to the ground and was forcibly knocked to death by the warhorse's back. The child's figure did not slow down at all. He quickly caught up with the last cavalryman, who was trembling in fear. He bent down, grabbed the horse's hind legs with both hands, and twisted his feet on the ground. The warhorse's hooves were off the ground, and it spun in a circle in the air before it was thrown out. After the cavalryman was thrown off the horse, he struggled to stand up. The child came in front of him, pulled out the Beiliong's saber from his back and stabbed it into the Beimang barbarian's heart. After pulling out the saber and putting it back into the scabbard, the child said calmly, "Big guy, this is the 379th one." Later, Commandant Fan Fun and the 400 scouts saw this scene from afar. They did not come forward to say anything. Instead, they began to form a formation in the north. After Fan Fan helped the child bring a warhorse, he patted the Beiliong saber on his waist and laughed softly. "Little general, why don't you take my saber after I die? I'm not greedy. When the time comes, you can help me kill 50 Beimang barbarians." Yu Dilong jumped onto the horse's back and stood with his saber in his sleeves. The child, who was covered in blood, rolled his eyes. Nowadays, the Yuzhou cavalry like to call this child called Yu Dilong, Little General. 2 days ago, Yu Dilong was supposed to escort 60 wounded riders to the east under Su Fengyan's arrangement, but the child refused no matter what. Even though Su Fengyan's face was angry, the child was still holding the warhorse with one hand, which had the big man's relic on it, and the northern cold saber on his back. He did not say anything. He did not want to leave either. Later on, it was a lightly injured officer who took the initiative to leave the main force, personally escorting the wounded as they retreated. Before leaving, he joked with this little general who had slaughtered his way through several great battles, telling him that he would just treat it as owing him 50 northern Mang barbarians. Only then did Su Fengyan tacitly agree to let Yu Dilong stay. The child probably really respected Su Fengyan, his master. Even if he stayed in the army, he did not dare to appear beside Yu Luandao and the others. One man and one horse hung alone at the tail of the cavalry and never spoke to anyone. Other than going out with Fan Fun scouts to spy on the military situation, he always silently followed behind the army alone. On the main battlefield, the 800 Beimang cavalry were almost completely wiped out after 3 charges. The 70 to 80 fleeing cavalrymen were also completely wiped out by Yu Dilong and Fan Fun's 400 scouts. All the Beimang cavalrymen who were still alive were finished off by the Yuzhou cavalry, who were cleaning up the battlefield. Su Fengyan stabbed a northern Mang centurion to death with his iron spear, whose eyes were filled with resentment before he died. He lightly raised his head and looked towards the west. More than 10 riders who were watching the battle from the other side of the river appeared in the distance. Su Fengyan's heart sank. He did not see that familiar figure in his field of vision. Chapter 1396. Su Fengyan patted his horse and dragged his spear forward. Just as he and his horse were about to cross the battlefield, a young Beimang cavalryman fell at the edge of the battlefield. His neck had been cut by a cold saber during the charge, and blood was flowing out. The dying young cavalryman raised his arm and tried to lift the Beimang saber. Su Fengyan glanced at him lightly. He did not hand over his spear and continued to urge his horse forward. But soon, not far behind him, 2 phantom cavalrymen knocked their bows and shot arrows at the same time. One arrow pierced through the Beimang cavalryman's saber-wielding arm, while the other pierced the young barbarian's cheek from the side. The dozen or so cavalrymen who came with Su Fengyan were all wearing armor, but their styles were messy. They did not look like they were from the regular border army. Most of them had a strong bandit aura that could not be concealed. The leader of the cavalrymen was still shocked when he saw Su Fengyan up close. He climbed down the mountain and dismounted, not daring to reveal Su Fengyan's identity. He knelt respectfully and said, "I, Hong Piao, am late. I cannot atone for my late arrival." Su Fengyan nodded and said, "Get up." Hong Piao stood up and said in a low voice, "Songdiaoer is already on his way. He has more than 1,200 cavalrymen under his command. Before he came, there was a setback and more than 300 people were purged. Among them, 4 of the Beimang spies were dug out." Su Fengyan did not comment. He smiled playfully and said, "Dug them out?" Hong Piao did not dare to speak. This middle-aged man, who was not very tall and honest, lowered his gaze. He did not even dare to breathe loudly, but his eyes were burning. Hong Yu was once the second guest minister who had trained the private cavalry of Mount Hui. Later, he parted ways with the first guest minister, Huang Fangfua. The latter was still a wild swallow who was unwilling to fly into the palace of the emperor and minister. Hong Yu, who was more ambitious, joined Bailiang's army and hoped to make a name for himself on the battlefield in the northwest. Unfortunately, he was never put in an important position. Later, under Huang Fujin's instructions, he infiltrated Song Diao-er's thieves' lair. He was both an assistant and a surveillance officer. Su Fengyan's realm dropped greatly, but his eyesight was still there. Hong Piao and Huang Langfo had been stuck at the door of Master Realm for many years, but they couldn't break through the barrier and couldn't improve. Then, like Mi Fengjie, they were lucky enough to meet the great year of the Jianghu and finally reached the first grade. Hong Yu was now a true first-grade Vajra realm martial artist. He was only one step away from the Finger Xian realm where one could ask for immortality with a light tap of the finger. However, it was not accurate to say that it was a great year for the emergence of dragons and snakes in Jianghu, because too many great grandmasters had died in the past few years. Just in the Liang dynasty alone, there was Wang Mingyin, who was ranked 11th in the world, Li Chungang, the sickly tiger Yang Taisui, Song Nianqing of the sword pool, Han Shengxian of the human cat, Lu Hao of the capital, the dragon tree monk of the two Zen temples, Xiaolingzhen of the spring invitation cottage, and so on. These outstanding top masters left the banquet one after another. It was not as simple as making room for others. There were many mysterious changes that involved fate, such as Wang Xianji's generous gift to Yu Dilong and someone in Western Shu's usurpation after the death of the dragon tree monk. Someone from the group of horse bandits behind Hong Yu clicked his tongue and said in a strange tone, "Chief Hong, I just found out that your name is not Hong Biao but Hong Yu. You still treat your brothers as outsiders. Don't you think you've lost your place as a hero? Why are your knees weak after seeing Bailiang's General Yu?" One of the leaders of that Song tribe, mounted bandit, clearly mistook the young military general on the back of the horse to be Underworld Cavalry's main general Yu Luandao. After all, for such a young border army general to be able to command 10,000 men, regardless of whether it was in northern Mang or northern Liang, even if he couldn't be said to be extremely rare, he could still be counted on one's fingers. For most of the horse bandits around Song Diao-er, they only found out about the inside story after the unexpected and bloody incident. They were not disgusted by the fact that their mother's family was part of the Northern Liang army. When they became horse bandits, who would not recognize their own family when they killed? It did not matter if you were surnamed Su from the Northern Liang or Murong from the Northern Mang or Yelu from the Northern Mang. Whoever gave them money and good horses, whoever was generous, would be the boss. But if it was said that they had some good feelings, it was pitifully little. Hong Yu, who was very utilitarian, was willing to be Su Fengyan, the leader of the Bailiang cavalry. During this period of time in Song Diao-er's bandit lair, he put the big picture first and endured everything silently. He had long suppressed his anger. When he heard the small leader, who was not even Song Diao-er's confidant, talking in his ear, his killing intent rose. Just as Hong Yu was about to smash the poor guy's skull with one palm, Su Fengyan stretched out his iron spear and patted Hong Yu's shoulder. He smiled and shook his head at him. Su Fengyan looked into the distance. Song Diao-er's cavalry was about to arrive. At this time, Yu Luandao, Shi Yulu, Fan Fon, and Liulong's 4 horsemen also rode their horses over. They did not pay much attention to these horse gang bandits, even though they were wearing armor and carrying swords. On the contrary, Fan Fon, who used to be a scout, was somewhat ashamed. Previously, he had only focused on killing in the battle formation and had actually missed these motley crew of riders. The senior commandant with evil intentions stared at these guys with gloomy eyes. Who was the best at cheating on others at the border? It was not a large group of horse gangs swallowing up a small force, but the Bailiang Frontier Army used these horse gang bandits as training targets. This was similar to the Bailiang scouts going to the refugee land to kill people to train and become crossbowmen. This was especially true for the Rouge Army, which was a terrifying heavy cavalry once they put on armor. Usually, when they had nothing to do, they would go out of the pass with light armor and light cavalry. They liked to scatter into groups of 100 to search for horse gang bandits outside the Great Wall. They did not carry cold swords or crossbows, but all carried iron spears. That was not all. The other Wei Xiong army had a popular catchphrase even in the southern Beimang dynasty. It was called, "Fatten up and then kill until the end of the year." It meant that every time the Wei Xiong army received information from the Bailiang crossbowmen, if there were not more than 1,000 horse gang bandits, They would not pay attention to them and would deliberately raise a tiger to invite calamity. However, once they received information that there were more than 1,000 horse gang bandits, they would randomly pick a day before the end of the year and march straight in to kill all of them. When Su Fengnian appeared alone, the few horse gang bandits behind Hong Yu did not feel much and dared to put on airs. However, when Yu Luandao and his 4 horses stood side by side, the natural gap between the horse gang and the Beiliang frontier army was immediately revealed. Su Fengnian said softly to Yu Luandao, "There will be 1,200 horse gang bandits appearing soon. Although we are allies in name, it is hard to say if there will be any accidents. Bring 1,000 ghost riders over first, and we will plan for the worst." Fan Fun was eager to try and secretly swallowed back the honorific prince that was at the tip of his tongue. He shouted with all his might, "The 400 men I have are enough. It was not easy to kill in the first place. My brothers are itching to kill." Yu Luandao did not act on his own. He looked at Su Fengnian and the latter smiled and nodded. Fan Fun did not need to give any orders. When he raised his arm high and made a gesture of gently clenching and unclenching his fist to the west, the 400 scouts immediately surged forward like a tide. This clearly showed that he was showing off his strength, causing the dozen or so horse gang bandits outside of Hong Yu to involuntarily retreat. Yu Luandao glanced at these horse gang bandits, who were fine in small-scale battles, but would be difficult for large-scale cavalry. He came to Su Fengnian's side and gave him a questioning look. Su Fengnian explained, "The horse gang is very familiar with the territory outside the mouth of the gourd. They can provide a place for our army to rest and reorganize." Yu Luandao heaved a sigh of relief and said happily, "If these bandits can really succeed, I dare not say anything else, but even against the 10,000 Ruran cavalry, our 3,200 cavalry will not only be able to recoup our losses, we will definitely have a surplus." An hour later, more than 1,000 cavalry came whistling from the distance. With the arrival of the main force of Songdiao Er's horse gang, the dozen or so cavalry behind Hong Yu grew bolder. Among them, the more impetuous and violent ones even dared to glare angrily at the 400 Yuzhou scouts. Of course, this was already the greatest boldness they could muster. As for actually drawing their swords against the scouts, that was something they would not dare to do even if they were given a few more guts. In this period of time, the entire Liangmang border was rumored to be crazy and valiant. The horse gang, who paid the most attention to their keen sense of smell, naturally would not miss out on this matter. They set out from Yuzhou to the northern part of Jizhou, and finally rushed all the way to the north of the mouth of the gourd. The young generals called Yu Luandao had beaten the 10,000 Ruran cavalry of Beimang down to only 3,000 to 4,000. Among the enemies they had already fought, there were the 2 senior generals on the eastern front of the Beimang, the Huguan, Changyu, and Binglu, which were the 3 major military towns on the border of Longyao province. Moreover, they were about to face the hunting of the 2 Jabo generals in autumn and winter. Hong Jingyan would personally lead 10,000 Ruran cavalry north to intercept them, and they would also have to deal with the Chun Jabo, urgently rushing from the west to the mouth of the gourd. Of the 4 Jabo generals, other than Xia Jabo, who was still on the grasslands, and Yelu Yuhu, a member of the imperial family, the other 3 were all people who had the potential to become Beimang great generals. It was just a matter of who could reach the top first. All of them had come for Yu Luandao's head. There was also a rumor that whoever could wipe out the Yuzhou cavalry would be able to bring Yu Luandao's head to the western capital of the southern court to have an audience with the emperor, becoming the second Beimang great general after Dongzhuo to be able to raise an unlimited number of private armies. When the 1,000-some horse gang saw the 400 Yuzhou scouts in front of them, they quickly reined in their horses and cursed out one after another. Su Fengnian said to Hong Yu, "You and I will go together." As the 2 rode forward, Su Fengnian calmly asked, "Mount Qingliang sent a total of 6 experts. You only know the identities of 3. Of the 3, how many died?" Hong Yu replied, "Only 1 died in battle after falling out with the spiderweb spies. This general received orders from Yozhou's General Huangfu not to reveal my identity too early, so I did not act. But this general secretly intercepted and killed 16 riders who snuck out of the horse gang's lair. They were all Beimang barbarians." Meanwhile, Yu Luandao had quietly returned to the battlefield. Chapter 1397. Song Diao, who looked like a scholar, held the reins with both hands and gently squeezed the horse's belly. He lazily urged the horse forward, moving up and down with the bumps of the horse's back. He had the demeanor of an immortal who did not kneel to heaven or the king. But when he saw the figure, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his face was full of disbelief and panic. He subconsciously straightened his back and urged the horse to speed up. When Song Diao recognized the face, the horse gang leader, who had lived a comfortable life outside the Great Wall in recent years, felt relieved. Although the horse in front of him looked similar, fortunately, it was not that person. Song Diao freed one hand and habitually touched the suet jade pendant on his waist. He asked with a smile, "May I ask if you are the General Yu who killed 30,000 enemies?" Su Fengyan, who was dragging the iron spear, sneered. "What? Song Diao, don't you recognize me? Is this called a person of high status forgetting things?" Hearing the unforgettable familiar voice, Song Diao's fingers that were stroking the jade pendant trembled. With his outstanding wisdom, he naturally guessed that the handsome child who could easily make the Guai Commandant Huangfu Jin obey his orders was His Royal Highness, who later took the two heads of Su Huainan and Raccoon Diwu from the hinterland of Beimang and returned to Beiliang. He was now the first vassal of the Liang dynasty, Su Fengyan. Song Diao rolled off the horse awkwardly. He supported himself with his hands on the ground and bowed his head. "I didn't know it was the prince who came. Song Diao deserves to die." The tip of Su Fengyan's iron spear lightly brushed across the sand. Song Diao only heard a question from above his head. "The secret letter asked you to lead the Yuzhou cavalrymen here. However, it didn't say that you could swagger over 1,000 cavalrymen here." Song Diao's face was pale as he said in a trembling voice, "Reporting to your highness, there are Beimang scouts everywhere outside the Calabash Gate, and there are even thousands of regular Beimang border troops. In addition, Song Diao's management is not good enough, and there was already an internal conflict in one of the nests. Song Diao's people are disunited, and Song Diao has mobilized all of his forces. This is a bad plan, and he really has no choice. In order to smoothly lead the way for your highness and General Yu, and not reveal any secrets, he can only bring all of his brothers with him to that most secretive valley with the Beimang cavalry. This way, even if there are still Beimang remnants in Song Diao's team, the news will not be able to escape." Su Fengyan turned his head to look at the sky. After a glance, he turned back and smiled. "It doesn't sound like a bad plan. It's clearly a foolproof plan. Song Diao, you are very considerate." Song Diao still had his head lowered. "To be loyal to your highness and die for you is a great blessing that I have accumulated over several lifetimes. If it weren't for your highness and General Huangfu's nurturing, Song Diao would be a pitiful worm leading 36 cavalry outside the pass. How can Song Diao not do his best?" Su Fengyan looked at the 1,000-strong mounted bandits outside the pass 200 paces away. His indifferent gaze swept across them, and many of the mounted bandits also looked at him curiously, as if they were curious. No matter how famous the young Luan saber was, it should not have made the fearless leader Song Diao so cowardly. The atmosphere was particularly solemn. More than 1,000 mounted bandits and 400 Yuzhou cavalry were facing each other. In the middle was Su Fengyan on horseback and the kneeling Song Diao. Su Fengyan rode behind Su Fengyan. Su Fengyan raised his arm, and this action scared the mounted bandits. They thought that the two sides would fall out with each other. It was true that more than 1,000 mounted bandits could do whatever they wanted in the desert beyond the Great Wall, but in front of them were more than 3,000 Yuzhou iron cavalry. Did the mounted bandits have nothing better to do than fall out with the Beiliang frontier army? Why did they want to charge and kill? They must be tired of living. At that time, Song Diao had used bloody means to suppress the forces that supported Beimang. Many of the central forces had stood by and even sided with Song Diao because of Song Diao's ruthlessness, and also because they feared the Beiliang cavalry from the bottom of their hearts. Although it was the Beimang army that was suppressing the Beiliang army, the mounted bandits were more afraid of the Beiliang cavalry. They felt that even if the Beiliang frontier army could not defeat the million-strong army of Beimang, The several thousand men surnamed you could turn the world upside down outside the calabash mouth. If he was determined to deal with more than 1,000 mounted bandits, wouldn't it be easy for him to send several thousand of the Su family cavalry? But soon, all the mounted bandits were relieved. A bird pierced through the clouds and landed on the arm of the armored general. Many of the mounted bandits secretly broke out in cold sweat. Damn it, the general of the Beiliang cavalry, Yu Luandao, was not only good at commanding troops, but also good at showing off his power. Su Fengyan gently waved his arm to signal Hai Dongxing to leave. He did not pay attention to Song Diao, whose expression could not be seen clearly. He raised his iron spear and pointed at two people in the mounted bandits. He asked, Hong Yuang, how long have those two been with Song Diao? Hong Yuang looked up and saw the young man and woman. He slowly said, I heard that the young man first appeared a year ago, but soon left the mounted bandits. Not long ago he came back with the woman. The spider web spies among the mounted bandits were also exposed by him, which led to the internal strife. I only know that this person is the bastard son of the third family of the Gusai prefecture. He has known Song Diao since he was young. Song Diao said that this person almost entered the chess and sword music school. For some reason, he is sick and always smells of medicine. As for the woman, her identity is unknown. I only know that she is from the Golden Cicada prefecture and has the nickname Buckthorn. Usually, she likes to drink with people. I have observed this woman. She is close to the master level. Her hands are full of calluses. She has practiced martial arts, but she does not have a strong Jianghu aura. Su Fengyan looked at the 1,000 mounted bandits and suddenly said, Song Diao, did you not expect to catch 3,200 Yuzhou cavalry and even make me, the king of Beiliang, take the bait? Don't hold it in. If you want to laugh, laugh out loud. Song Diao looked up with a blank expression. Hong Yuang was shocked. Su Fengyan looked at this extremely lucky mounted bandit and laughed. There are two groups of people in Qingliang Mountain. Hong Yuang and the others on the surface were left behind to help you lure Yu Luandao's Yuzhou cavalry. This is not strange. But I am very curious how you killed all the Beiliang masters in the dark. Logically speaking, the Tide Listening Pavilion and the Whispering Room sent out 3 master-level masters. With your little top-notch martial arts, even if you succeeded, you would not be able to hide it from Hong Yuang and the other Jianghu masters. I guess that you had the idea of sucking up to both sides a year ago. Only when Yang Yuanzhan led 300,000 troops into the mouth of the gourd did you decide to join the Beimang. Tell me, who is that young man and woman from Beimang? Song Diao was stunned. He looked up and met Su Fengyan's eyes. Then his face tensed up bit by bit. Then the corners of his mouth curled up. His smile began to ripple. When he patted the dust off his robe and stood up, there was already a radiant smile on his face. The furious Hong Yuang was about to crush this daring ant to death. Su Fengyan held the gun with one hand and waved his other hand to stop Hong Yuang from killing. He asked, other than those two couples, who are you hiding from? Who else can help you stay calm in the face of danger? Or how many? Song Diao's smile did not diminish. He extended a finger and waved it. Not many, just one. What a coincidence, it just so happens to be able to contend against your highness. Of course, this old ancestor did not come for you at the beginning. So, ever since this humble one met your highness, this humble one's luck has been so good that it can't be stopped. 3 riders suddenly appeared from the group of horse gang. Su Fengyan said to himself, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Hong Jingyan, Murong Baoding, Deng Mao Zhongliang. Beimang doesn't have many martial arts grandmasters now. Tuoba Bodhisattva shouldn't be here. I've met the other 4 except for Deng Mao, who was defeated by Wang Xiu, and they are not here. Since the ascension of the great immortal Yuan Qingshan, Tao De sect has no successor. The chess and sword music school has 5 first-class CI names. Sword Chi is almost dead, so the Bronze Man Grandmaster is gone. Not long ago, the great music house also died. That Han Gu, who won the first prize of the 2-word CI, is the crown princess, so it's even more impossible. 5th Raccoon of Tibbing Mountain is dead. In terms of masters, there is no successor. I heard that Little Thought died in Yuzhou, As for the person who killed her, he is still waiting for Su Yanbing's third spear. Song Diaoer said with a smile. Your Highness, you would never have expected this. In the end, Northern Mang's sincerity is even greater than your Northern Liang's. Before you appeared, they offered a price of a major commander. After confirming that you would appear, I Song Diaoer would become the #1 person under the Dragon Waste Province's festival warrant. Song Diaoer bowed to Su Fengyan to express his gratitude. Not far behind him were the 3 riders. Hong Yu looked at the funny scene of the horse gang's backs soaked with sweat and couldn't help but laugh. Song Diaoer raised his head and stood properly. He patted his chest and said with a smile, You are indeed the #1 person in the world, Su Fengyan. I'm actually scared to death. I thank your Highness for not killing me. Su Fengyan saw the rider between the young man and woman and laughed involuntarily. He said, Old sir, it's you. The white-haired old Confucian scholar was thin. At first glance, he didn't have the bearing of a master. He was just a poor old pedant. Su Fengyan sighed with emotion. The old man was the same. The first time the two of them met was in Wild Goose Pass, which had long since become the Northern Mang Army's barracks. At that time, Su Fengyan had even teased the nagging old man by saying, Old mister, bend over and see if your bag of books has fallen. The old man was the Baimang peace magistrate who had traveled for 20 years. Chapter 1398. The elder pointed at the young man at his side. Tuoba Chiun, spring restraining bowl, also my chess and sword music school's divination operator is slow. Can't be considered a bad chess player, just too slow. Not long ago, he said that you would definitely appear outside the calabash mouth, so this old man followed him here. The elder then pointed at the woman to his left. Yelu Yuhu. She doesn't have any evil intentions, purely wishing to see you with her own eyes. The elder pointed at himself. This old man obviously wants your head, but it's a year or 2 earlier than expected. He is a bit disappointed, but even more so is admiration. To be honest, apart from Autumn and Winter's 7,000 elite cavalry, Hong Jingyan's 10,000 Ruran cavalry will also fill in the gap. If you insist on running, this old man naturally cannot stop you. However, you can only leave behind the 3,200 cavalry and head west alone. Before you leave, if you want to kill to vent your anger, apart from Tuoba Chiun and Yelu Yuhu, this old man cannot even be bothered to stop the others. It's up to you. Su Fengyan asked, Is it Tuoba Bodhisattva waiting for me in the west? The elder shook his head and said, Tuoba Bodhisattva cannot be moved. My great Mang's chi cultivators are gone. Your Bailiang still has Tantai Pingjing and Guanyin sect. Once Tuoba Bodhisattva moves, he will alert the enemy. At that time, Su Yanbing will definitely come. That Huyen Grand Monastery will be more than happy to not fight with anyone. Su Fengyan released an N of acknowledgement. If Tuoba Bodhisattva is rushing over, I will definitely be on my way back right now. Is that Murong Baoding and Zhong Liang working together? The elder said with a sincere sigh, Su Shao is #1 in war, #1 in marriage, #1 in the world, 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 and even dying of old age in bed, formidable. In my opinion, Zhang Julu is far inferior to Su Shao. The old man was like a senior who was chatting amiably with a junior. He said calmly, Both sides of the border have been tightly sealed. However, spies in Liangzhou and Yuzhou have sent back intelligence. This time, Chu Lushan didn't take any risks. For your sake, he transferred the main force of Liangzhou to Calabash's mouth. Fortunately, your Bailiang Protector General didn't actually do this, or else our great king of the southern courtyard's 500,000 soldiers would have had to run after him until their legs broke, and perhaps they wouldn't have had any good results. However, in the long run, abandoning Liangzhou for quick success and instant benefits may seem bold, but it is destined to be unwise. Su Fengyan said helplessly, Old mister, victory is already in your hands. Why are you still helping Hong Jingyan stall for time? The sickly Tuoba Chiyun smiled knowingly, while Yelu Yuhu stared intently at this young man who was completely different from the imposing figure he had imagined. From beginning to end, Song Diaoer had no right to interrupt. He was also tactful. Other than that Hong Jingyan, any one of them could drown him with a spit of saliva. He hoped that no one would pay attention to an insignificant minor character like him. When Song Diao heard the Taipingling's harsh words about burning the bridge after crossing the river, he was truly trembling with fear. He was afraid that Su Fengyan would casually stab a large hole in him with his iron spear. However, from the looks of it, Su Fengyan was too busy taking care of himself. He probably didn't care about the life and death of a mounted bandit like Song Diao. Song Diao rejoiced, but he also flew into a rage out of humiliation. He thought that once he became a major character in charge of half of the border towns in Dragon Waste Province, he would definitely slaughter his way into Yuzhou. Suddenly, Yelu Yuhu noticed that the Taiping Ling and Tuoba Chiyun looked at each other and smiled. However, their smiles contained a bit of self-mockery and a trace of helplessness. Yelu Yuhu frowned, still staring at the young man who acted against common sense. Thinking along the lines, she couldn't come to a conclusion, so she had to think the opposite. The guy in front of her couldn't have pretended to be calm in front of the Emperor's preceptor and Tuoba Chiyun. He definitely had something to rely on. The crouching Bao City and Luanhe City had already fallen. It was impossible for Yuzhou to mobilize enough troops to cross the layers of defense to support him and the young general called Yu Luandao. Liangzhou's main force also hadn't moved. She finally relaxed her brows. The playfulness of a cat catching a mouse in her eyes faded little by little, turning into coldness. Su Fengyan glanced at the Beimang woman who had allegedly threatened to teach his second sister, Su Weisheng, a lesson. He smiled and said, "You've been staring at me for a long time. Do you want me to get pregnant, or do you want to get pregnant yourself?" Without waiting for Yelu Yuhu to retort, Su Fengyan smiled and said, "You better not fall into my hands one day." Su Fengyan raised the metal spear in his hand. Looking at her, he no longer smiled. He only slowly said, "Otherwise, I'll hang your corpse from above." The cicada was the supply line of the Beimang outside the gourd. The mantis was Su Fengyan and Yu Luandao's Yuzhou cavalry. The oriole was Taiping Ling's trio and the Bates 1,000 mounted bandits, the 7,000 elite horsemen of the two great Jubo, Hong Jingyan's 10,000 Ruran cavalry, Zhong Liang and Murong Baoding. This created an interesting situation of the mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. But what was truly interesting was that slingshot by the side, that could be said to be the finale. The old man sighed softly, but he still smiled at Su Fengyan and said, they're gone. Unfortunately, most of Hong Jingyan's Ruran cavalry probably won't be able to escape. The two great Jubo who came from the Eastern Front with great difficulty will have made a wasted trip. Su Fengyan, this old man will pass a message to Dong Zhuo, telling him to pay more attention to Chu Lushan. Chapter 1399. Su Fengyan suddenly looked at an unremarkable rider in the group of mounted bandits. "Old sir, you're not kind. You let a great grandmaster like Zhong Liang pretend to be a coward for so long." The old man seemed to have let go of the knot in his heart. He laughed loudly and said, "All is fair in war." Su Fengyan smiled. The old man had already turned his horse around. He turned his head and asked, "This old man is very curious. When did you know that the 10,000 riders would come? Or was this a trap set up by you and the Protectorate from the very beginning?" Su Fengyan didn't say anything. The old man shook his head and slowly left. The Order of Peace, Divinator Slow, Tuoba Chiyun, Yelu Yuhu, and the great demon Zhong Liang, who had been hiding among the mounted bandits until the last moment, returned north. Tuoba Chiyun coughed a few times. After stopping her cough, she said, "It's a pity that Murong Baoding still needs half a day to get here. Otherwise, we might have a chance to make Su Fengyan stay." The imperial tutor of Beimang said calmly, "It's not that Murong Baoding can't make it. He just doesn't want to." Before leaving, Yelu Yuhu didn't forget to make a chopping hand gesture at that bastard. At this moment, she said coldly, "They're all traitors." They were all traitors. Other than Murong Baoding, who else had the surname Murong? The old man had already closed his eyes to rest, turning a deaf ear. Tuoba Chiyun shouted, "Shut up!" The demon Zhong Liang, who had returned without accomplishing anything, yawned loudly. He didn't want to get involved in anything. The old man was silent for a long time. Suddenly he said, "Whether it's Yelu or Murong, even if one Beimang can't hold them all, as long as we take down Liang, no matter what their surname is, no matter how ambitious they are, it'll be enough to share." Yelu Yuhu said in a small voice, "Sir, I was rude." Behind the 4 horsemen, the more than 1,000 bandits who were baffled by the situation felt very bleak in the wind, especially the dumbstruck Song Diao, who had no idea what had happened. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. Yu Luandao, who thought he was going to fight to the death, came to Su Fengyan's side. The latter approached him and patted his shoulder. "Let's go back to Liangzhou together with the great snow dragon riders." Yu Luandao stared blankly for a moment, his eyes instantly becoming moist. He quickly turned his horse around and galloped away. Su Fengyan gave Hong Yuang a look. The latter nodded with a grin, and then stopped talking. Su Fengyan, whose back was facing Hong Yuang, said calmly, "You don't have to blame yourself. After you're done, go and tell the 1,000-odd mounted bandits that if you want to live, you don't need them to risk their lives. Later on, each of you will go to the battlefield and cut off the heads of 5 Ruran cavalry." No matter how stupid Song Diao was, and how he had always been a very intelligent person, he should know what was about to happen to him. As a result, he fell to his knees with a thud and kowtowed with all his might. He said in a heart-wrenching voice, "Your Highness, please forgive me. Although Song Diao deserves to die, Song Diao still has 1,200 loyal mounted bandits that can be used. I can even help the Bailiang gather another 2,000 strong mounted bandits. Song Diao will definitely help Your Highness disrupt the Beimang supply lines. Your Highness, I beg you to spare my life. Song Diao really is still useful." No matter how Song Diao kowtowed and begged for mercy, Su Fengyan had already left. When Song Diao saw Hong Yu's feet out of the corner of his eye, he suddenly raised his head and roared before he died, "Su Fengyan, at least let this old man die by your hands." Hong Yu slapped his palm down on the head of this ungrateful mounted bandit and pressed down, turning his head and upper body into a pile of meat paste. It looked like a blood-red tree stump. Hong Yu lightly shook his hand and spat. He sneered, "You got off too easy." The Yuzhou cavalry had just finished cleaning up the battlefield. When they heard the news from Yu Luandao, there were no heaven-shaking cheers that came from surviving a calamity. All the Yuzhou cavalry who had thought that they would once again have to abandon the corpses of their comrades, silently carried the corpses of their fallen comrades onto their war horses with red eyes. After Su Fengyan stopped his horse, he looked at the 3,200 Yuzhou cavalry, as well as the comrades behind them who had their eyes forever closed. Su Fengyan's lips trembled, but in the end, he did not say a single word. He and his horse turned around and began to head south. This cavalry would soon be able to head west, then south again, and they would be able to enter Liang province. Yu Luandao followed. Shi Yulu and Su Wenyao followed. Fan Fen followed. The 3,200 cavalry followed. That child Yu Dilong was still hanging at the tail of the army. He sniffled and muttered to himself, "Big guy, I'll owe you first." Shi Yulu said softly, "General, I didn't dare to tell you before, but Lu Tao, who died on the battlefield 2 days ago, was that young scout who was waiting for you in Jibei village. Before this child died, he said that if you had time in the future, he hoped that General could pour a bowl of wine for his corporal in front of the tombstone on Mount Qingliang. It would be best if you could get him a bowl as well." Captain Fan Fen stretched out his hand to wipe his face. His expression could not be seen clearly. This child did not drink when he was alive. Su Fengyan nodded. He remembered that young scout. Back then, when he had returned from the village, the scout had wanted to speak but did not dare to. In the end, he did not say anything and only smiled bashfully. Su Fengyan suddenly pressed his horse's belly and raised his spear. He charged straight for the 10,000 Ruran cavalry and the Hong Jingyan. Chapter 1400. When Hong Yu led the 1,200 mounted bandits to the battlefield, the scene before them was one that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The Ruran cavalry, known as the best elite of the Southern dynasty, had died in battle and their corpses were piled up like tombs. Meanwhile, the mounted bandits were unfamiliar and shocked by the white armored cavalry. There were some who were more knowledgeable among the bandits. They could tell that the arrangement of this cavalry was somewhere between heavy and light cavalry, with each person riding 2 or even 3 horses. However, compared to the Yuzhou cavalry led by Yu Luandao, they were clearly more imposing and majestic. This was because every horse was equipped with a heavy spear, and in terms of armor, it was a small full armor style for both man and horse. After the bandits entered the battlefield, they were ordered to chop off the heads of the Ruran cavalry and continue piling up their corpses. Meanwhile, the white cavalry began to remove their armor and hang themselves on the backs of the war horses that they were not riding, preparing to withdraw from the battlefield. When the bandits chopped off the heads of the Ruran cavalry, they would often subconsciously glance at one of the riders. This rider was seated high on the back of a horse. He did not wear a helmet and wielded a spear. He was tall and sturdy. This rider came to Su Fengyan's side but did not dismount. Instead, he looked towards the south with Su Fengyan and said regretfully, "It's a pity that Hong Jingyan led several hundred of his personal guards back to the mouth of the gourd. Otherwise, as long as he died here, the remaining Ruran cavalry would not be worth mentioning. Yang Yuanzhan would have lost all of his mobile forces, and we would have been able to kill our way into the mouth of the gourd and compete with the Beimang to see who could surround them first. Now we can't. The 7,000 elite cavalry from the 2 bowls are still watching from the east." Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "Things can't be perfect. If you guys hadn't arrived in time, the Beimang peace decree would have joined forces with Hong Jingyan, Zhongliang, and Murong Baoding. Not to mention Yu Luandao and the 3,000 Yuzhou cavalry, even I would not have been able to escape. Song Diaoer's betrayal is nothing, but Tuoba Chi-yun, who had long guessed that I would appear outside the mouth of the gourd, is not to be underestimated. For him to be able to persuade the Grand Imperial Tutor of Beimang to come here, it means that he has a terrifying amount of authority in Beimang. Second brother Yuan, when we confront him in the future, we have to be more careful." It was Yuan Zuozong, the commander of Beiliang's cavalry. He squinted his silkworm eyebrows and nodded. Beiliang paid more attention to Dong Zhuo and neglected Tuoba Chi-yun. Su Fengyan looked around. "Where is she?" Yuan Zuozong said with a smile. "Commandant Wang led a group of crossbowmen to the west. He probably doesn't dare to see you." Su Fengyan felt a little helpless. Blue Bird, a second-class maidservant and kamikaze of Wutong'an, after returning from Beimang with the instant spear left behind by Wang Xiu, she entered the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry and was promoted to a crossbowman commandant through her military exploits. She was more anxious than anyone else to rush to the mouth of the gourd to save the emperor. She led a group of crossbowmen in advance and was able to pull a distance of nearly 100 miles from the main army. According to the military laws of Beiliang, she should have been reprimanded and expelled from the army by the commanding general. But after the battle ended, she immediately disappeared. Yuan Zuozong gave the greatest trust and tolerance to this orphan of spear immortal Wang Xiu. It was not because she was a vassal of a vassal, but because although she was a woman, she was the best soldier on the battlefield. The heads of the Ruran cavalry from the 1st to the 8th were all smashed by her instant spear. Su Fengyan glanced back. In the distance, his 3rd disciple Lu Yunzhang was standing next to his 1st disciple Yu Dilong. It seemed that Lu Yunzhang was spitting saliva everywhere, while Yu Dilong was silent. Su Fengyan sighed. He did not know if that girl Wang Sheng, who followed White Fox to Beimang to practice the sword, had the same luck as her. Yuan Zuozong said softly, "It's time to go." Su Fengyan nodded. "Yes." Yu Luandao came to the side of Su Fengyan and Yuan Zuozong. Yuan Zuozong smiled and asked, "General Yu, the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry is still lacking a deputy general. Are you interested? Although I do not have the authority to appoint, His Highness is here. If you agree, I guarantee that His Highness will not refuse. He will only go with the flow." Su Fengyan smiled knowingly. The several personal armies of the Beiliang Frontier Army were all the family property that Su Shao had left for his children. It could be considered the most extravagant thing in the world. Apart from Su Fengyan's 800 white horses, his youngest son Su Longxiang's private army had increased from 10,000 to 30,000. becoming the mainstay of Liuzhou. Su Fengyan's two sisters, Su Jihu and Su Weisheng, also had their own personal armies. Beiliang's nearly 10,000 heavy cavalry came from these two armies. The Beiliang Protectorate could dispatch these personal armies under the name of General Su Zhao's children. However, they generally did not interfere in the specific military matters. Yu Luandao said calmly, "The Great Snow Dragon cavalry is good, but our Yuzhou cavalry is not bad at all." Yuan Zuozong smiled but did not say anything. He did not care about Yu Luandao's unappreciative attitude. Contrary to the insistence of this Beiliang outsider, he admired him even more. Su Fengyan suddenly said, "At that time Kai Nan, who was in charge of the military affairs of He and Ji, stopped us. Yozhou's 30,000 cavalry could only send 10,000 out of the border. Old General Tianheng was angry that the Beiliang Protectorate, or to be precise, that I was not tough enough. He was so angry that he did not want to be the deputy general. He took off his armor and returned to his home. It is said that he secretly scolded me that Su Fengyan's courage was used up when he resisted the imperial edict." Yu Luandao's heart tightened. Although it was inappropriate for General Tian to be angry, Tianheng was experienced and prudent. He was a very righteous commander. The Yuzhou cavalry could not lack this stabilizing force. "If your highness wants to punish me, I am willing to use all my military merits to atone for Tianheng's crime." Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "I don't mean to settle accounts with him. I just hope that you can pass a message to Tianheng for me when you return to Yuzhou province. Tell him not to sulk anymore. I know his family's situation. His two sons were killed in battle before they were 20 years old. How could the old general have a grandson to play with? Yozhou's 30,000 cavalry, he will be the chief general, and Yu Luandao will be the deputy general. Sure, Yulu and Su Wenyao will be the general of cavalry and the general of agile cavalry, each leading 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry. At that time, the old general will most likely not be willing to be the chief general. You can say that it is an order from me and the Protectorate. He can either be the chief general or continue to play with his grandson." Yu Luandao immediately beamed and cupped his fists, saying, "This general obeys." Su Fengyan said in a deep voice, "These 3,200 cavalry will be established as the no-retreat camp. Yu Luandao will be the first officer of this camp. As for the soldiers of this camp, I, Su Fengyan, will also have a name, but they will not be counted as active cavalry." Yu Luandao bit his lips and his eyes turned red. He abruptly turned around and galloped several hundred paces away. He took a banner with the word "Su" from a Yuzhou cavalryman and roared at the 3,200 Yuzhou cavalrymen. "General's order? My 3,200 Yuzhou cavalrymen will set up a no-retreat camp." Yu Luandao raised the blood-soaked banner high in the air. "No-retreat camp. Raise the banner today." The 3,200 cavalry drew their Beiliang sabers in unison. All the Great Snow Dragon cavalry also mounted their horses and drew their sabers, willing to show the might of this brave cavalry that had won the first camp in the Yuzhou border army. Yuan Zuozong, as an old general of Beiliang who had personally participated in a series of wars in the spring and autumn period, also drew his saber and subconsciously glanced at Su Fengyan. Yuan Zuozong did not see the passion and desire that would appear on a young general's face. Yuan Zuozong said softly, "Deaths in war are unavoidable." Su Fengyan said softly, "Let's go." The cavalry quickly moved westward, leaving behind a horrendous mountain of Ruran cavalry outside the mouth of the gorge. Roughly an hour later, more than 100 riders slowly arrived at this bitter battlefield. The two riders at the front were two 30-something-year-old Northern Mang high-ranking officers. One of them looked at the various capitals with a complicated expression. In a situation where the numbers are equal, when encountering 10,000 riders, is there really no way to win? Chapter 1401. The other rider said indifferently, "Purely in terms of fighting strength, our Yelu Murong's two kings' heavy cavalry are actually not inferior. In a battlefield where both sides have invested over 100,000 troops, in terms of cutting through formations, heavy cavalry still have a bit of an advantage. However, if you want to pick a place to fight one-on-one with 10,000 cavalry, there really isn't the slightest bit of suspense. There's nothing that can be done about it. The entire Bailiang cavalry's elite are all in the Great Snow Dragon cavalry. The age of the cavalry all between 20 to 30, the middle and lower level generals around 40, the higher level generals all veterans of the spring and autumn period, every single one of them riding a Bailiang first-class warhorse. If our Baimang truly wants to create our own Great Snow Dragon cavalry, it's not that we can't support it, but the key lies in who will be the main general. Dong Zhuo fits the bill, but he already has over 100,000 Dong family soldiers. Even if His Majesty is at ease, forget about biting, no one in the southern court is willing. Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan, these great generals who are familiar with officialdom, aren't willing to take on this hot potato from the bottom of their hearts. The first rider dismounted in a carefree manner, squatting down to pick up a Ruren curved blade that still had traces of blood on it. He wiped off the blood on his armor, saying with a sneer, "Hong Jingyan really is pitiful. The entire Ruren mountain range's elite troops are his, yet in the end, he still wasn't able to seize the great king of the southern court and was even conferred the title of assistant minister of Xi Jing's Ministry of War. He finally thought that the Calabash Gate was easy to bully, wanting to lead 20,000 cavalry to unleash a slaughter within Yozhou's borders. In the end, he didn't even have a chance to attack Crouching Bao and Luanhe cities. Yang Yuanzhan and Zhongtan have already begun fighting Sunrise Light, so he finally had a chance to make a contribution. He eagerly turned around and ran out of the Calabash Gate. Great, in just a short while, half of the Great Snow Dragon cavalry's forces were knocked down. The key is that this fellow didn't even dare to enter the battlefield. I really don't know if he can still sit on the seat of Ruren Lord. As for what he wants to compete with Dong Zhuo in the future, I think he should understand that there's no chance. The other rider did not dismount. He shook his head and said, "Hong Jingyan is not that simple." The squatting general's thumb lightly touched the edge of the Ruren war saber. "I'm very curious as to why that guy didn't fight with the Taiping Rit. If he could kill the medicine pot Tuoba Tianyun, and that woman who was about to have her title of Xiajubo snatched away by Zhongtan, and then he would bravely die in battle at Zhongliang's hands, how good would that be?" Another person said with a smile, "From this, it can be seen that in the battle at Lu province, this brother was seriously injured." The squatting general of Baimang stood up and looked at the man on horseback. He smiled and said, "Lord Dong Zhubo, that Yuan Tingshan from Ji province had personally forced Wei Jingtang to leave the city and fight with us. At that time, I was stunned. With only 700 to 800 cavalry and 4,000 infantry, he dared to fight with nearly 10,000 cavalry. It made me think that there were still tens of thousands of ambushing soldiers in Liang, or that there was a large cavalry army in Liaoxi tailing us. In the end, in just an hour, Wei Jingtang's men were all dead. Yuan Tingshan and his father-in-law's 7,000 private cavalry did not even make a fart. If I hadn't seen the capital built by 10,000 Ruren cavalry today, I would have thought that we Baimang could just casually bring out 100,000 cavalry and bypass Bailiang to flatten the central plains in one go." The general known as Dong Zhubo said with a deep voice, "The Ji province cavalry gathered by Yuan Tingshan and the private army of the Li family of Yanbao must be waiting patiently somewhere for us to return to the eastern front. You and I must not be careless." Qiu Zhubo twitched his lips. After mounting his horse, he tossed out the Ruren scimitar and stabbed it into the roof of a capital. "I really don't think much of that mad dog Yuan Tingshan. Instead, I'm very interested in the remnants of West Chu in Guangling. Two of them by the name of Ko Jianghuai and Xie Shibian." After Ko Jianghuai gave up his post, Zhao Yi's lucky general, Song Li, quickly led his troops to reclaim the territory with ease. Originally, they had the upper hand on the eastern front, but now, they are being suppressed by Song Li and don't even dare to show their faces. It is said that all the faces in that small imperial court of West Chu have changed. Those who had previously submitted petitions to accuse Ko Jianghuai of possessing an army for his own sake are all dumbfounded now. That is why they have begun to sing praises for Ko Jianghuai. Dong Zhubo said softly, "As long as Chao Chongqing has yet to make his move, it means that even if West Chu does not have the upper hand, it also means that they have not fallen into a disadvantageous position." Qiu Zhubo chuckled and said, "In any case, the messier it is, the better." Suddenly, this Qiu Zhubo turned his head to look at his peer, who was also one of the four great Zhubo. Wang Jingchong, do you think there will be a day when Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai will appear in Beiliang? Dong Jubo stared blankly for a moment. His expression was grave as he said in a low voice, Great Ru Shiwei, you also have this kind of intuition? Qiu Yabo de Ru Shiwei rubbed his chin. That would be fun. But I like it. Back when Hong Jia was fleeing north, Wang Jingchong was still a 10-year-old remnant of the spring and autumn period. He had followed his family's private tutor into Beimang while reciting the sage's scriptures. He had long forgotten the environment of his childhood. However, on that kind of wandering path, the incessant sound of reading from the neighboring caravans had left a deep impression on this Qiu Jubo, who had persisted in studying even after his family had entered Gusai Prefecture. On horseback, Wang Jingchong fell into deep thought. He muttered to himself, For the sake of reviving the state, you will cause the land of the Central Plains to sink again. Chao Chongqing, do you feel great pain deep in your heart? Since you know it's impossible, yet you still do it, then what exactly is Chao Chongqing after? Great Ru Shiwei shot a glance at this Qiu Jubo. His mood complicated. The two of them were about the same age, but the achievements they had accumulated over the past 10 years were enough for the arrogant and conceited Great Ru Shiwei to admit that Wang Jingchong had not only accumulated more than himself, but also more than the she-wolf Yelu Yuwu on the grasslands. Of course, he had more than that Zhongtan who had just amazed everyone on the battlefield of Huluku in Yuzhou. Zhongtan had only just entered the army, but he had already become a vanguard general in a single leap. He had only just taken down crouching Bao City, yet some people were already calling him the more genuine Xia Jubo of Beimang. Wang Jingchong, on the other hand, had to start from the bottom of the ranks, step by step. He had been a sergeant, a centurion, a chiliarch, and then a general. However, in the end, he could only become Qiu Jubo because he had the backing of the Southern Dynasty's Yi clan, which was allied with the Jia clan through marriage. Great Ru Shiwei's complicated attitude toward Wang Jingchong, to a large extent, also represented the entire Beimang's dilemma toward these remnants of the spring and autumn period. His Majesty was so open-minded and broad-minded that when he ascended the throne, he personally started a bloody case that was secretly described by the Southern Dynasty's literati as melon and vine plunder. The cause of the tragedy was actually a jar of ashes of the old head of the Yi clan. Originally, the Norland did not even care about the life or death of such a person. However, a memorial suddenly appeared on His Majesty's desk. Then, His Majesty ordered that all the old members of the Yi clan who were unwilling to be buried in the Southern Dynasty be beheaded and their clan status reduced by 1 level. Even though more than 10 years had passed since the tragedy, there were still elderly remnants of the Southern Dynasty who died from time to time, but they still hoped to bury their ashes in the Central Plains and build a fake grave in Beimang so that they could be exposed. It was not until the decree of Taiping became the imperial preceptor of Beimang that this ban began to loosen. The Norland allowed the remnants of the Southern Dynasty to only build a cenotaph after they died and leave their ashes to wait for the army of Beimang to trample the Central Plains. Great Ru Shiwei asked with a smile, Wang Jingchong, there is also a place in Beimang that is known as Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall. How is it different from the real Central Plains? Wang Jingchong said flatly, I forgot. Su Fengyan and Yuan Zuozong squatted side by side on top of a hill when the army was resting. Su Fengyan turned his head and said, If the 300,000 border soldiers of Beiliang today were not surnamed Su but Chun, then there would be fewer casualties in Beiliang. Yuan Zuozong did not deny, Many people think so, and I am no exception. Su Fengyan put his palm on the sand. But Li Yishan said that once Beiliang was handed over to Chan Jibao, there would only be one situation. That is, Beiliang would be better and the world would be worse. Yuan Zuozong was a little confused. Su Fengyan chuckled softly. Brother Yuan, let me keep you guessing. I hope that one day I can help my master prove that he is not wrong. Yuan Zuozong smiled and said, I will wait. Don't worry. Remembering the withered scholar who lived on top of Tide Listening Pavilion and whose ashes were scattered in the border, Su Fengyan closed his eyes and said in his heart, Master, don't worry. Chapter 1402. Su Fengyan had originally planned to part ways with Yu Luandao and Yochi No Retreat Battalion at the northern border of Liangyu, and then head to the Beiliang Protectorate where Chu Lushan was. However, There was an urgent report from a spy that Yan Wenluan was already on her way and wanted to meet him to discuss military matters. Therefore, Su Fengyan chose a location in the middle and had the commander-in-chief of Beiliang's army, who controlled more than 100,000 border troops, wait for him in Yanji County. When Yu Dilong heard that they were going to Yanji County, his previously depressed child finally smiled a little. Unfortunately, when he found out that Su Fengyan and Yan Wenluan had arranged to meet in the county capital, and not in Bishan County where his master had been the registrar for a period of time, Yu Dilong fell silent again. He felt a sense of loss as if he had just crossed the threshold of his home but not entered it. Su Fengyan stayed in an elegant residence that had been meticulously arranged by Fu Shuifeng in the middle of the night. The group of people had just stepped over the threshold when they heard the sound of heavy rain hitting the roof and courtyard walls behind them. Su Fengyan did not feel sleepy. After arriving at the study with a large collection of books, he stood by the window and looked at the curtain of rain in the courtyard. Perhaps it was just as the ancient saying went, "Late at night is best for reminiscing about the past." For some reason, Su Fengyan remembered many of his frivolous actions when he was young. For example, he had stamped the word fake on the hundreds of authentic works of famous artists he had passed through, and he had spent a lot of money on foreign wanderers passing through Beiliang's territory. He still remembered a certain famous scholar from Jiangnan who had cursed Beiliang for being a shortcut to the officialdom for half of his life. Su Fengyan was indignant that the scholar had written many poems about riches and honor after occupying a high position. He had even sent someone to deliver a letter to the scholar. The general idea was that the scholar, who had been flattered and praised as a graceful and elegant plaything, should not be regarded as truly rich. If one was truly rich, they would not talk about fine wine, fine food, gold, and jade. What lazy pillow jade cool was all for the poor. In the end, Su Fengyan wrote a sentence on the letter. "When the rain comes, I listen to the sound of banana leaves 1,000 times. When the rain comes, I sit and watch the lake." It was said that the old scholar was furious when he read the letter. He quickly wrote a letter of impeachment. First, he said that banana leaves were not resistant to the cold, and their branches and leaves would crack when exposed to the wind. It was not easy to find a single banana in the northwestern frontier fortress, but there were actually 1,000 trees on Mount Qingliang. Therefore, he concluded, it must be the king of Beiliang, Su Shao, who embezzled the army's funds and filled his own pockets. He completely ignored the important matters at the border and betrayed the emperor's grace. He should be stripped of his title. Of course, at that time, there were such righteous memorials in the Liang imperial court all year round. The late Emperor Zhao Dun did not pay any attention to them, but he did not restrict them. Su Fengyan clearly remembered that after he sent out the letter, it stirred up a heated discussion in the Gangnam-do literary circle. One side was scolding him, Su Shao and Beiliang. His second sister, Su Weisheng, who had just gone to Shangyin Academy to study, wrote a letter saying that Su Fengyan's writing was rubbish. However, in the end, she personally wrote a letter to the famous scholar. After that, all the famous scholars in Jiangnan tucked their tails between their legs. However, Su Shao used some unknown means to obtain the letter. When he was drinking with his son in Wutongyan, he flattered him incessantly. He said that he had to consult with Li Yishan for a long time before he understood the meaning of 1,000 banana leaves. After he was drunk, he repeated the same few sentences over and over again. He said that he was really happy that his son was better than his father. Look, he even knew how to compose poems. In the future, he would definitely be a more competent and convincing vassal king than him, Su Shao. Even though Su Fengyan's memory was far superior to that of ordinary people, he could not remember Su Zhao's words and expressions because of his sloppy and perfunctory attitude at the time. However, there was one action of Su Zhao's that he remembered more and more clearly even after so many years. Before Su Shao left Wutongyan in a drunken stupor, he picked up the letter from the Gangnam-do on the table and carefully put it away in his sleeve. At the time, Su Fengyan was somewhat puzzled. Su Shao had walked step by step towards the glorious official position in his life. Even the imperial edicts for promotions and titles had always been piled up carelessly. Was it worth it for you to take a letter that was sent to scold someone so seriously? Chapter 1403. Su Fengyan stood by the window without sleeping all night. It seemed like in the blink of an eye, it was already a new morning. Last night, the rain had fallen intermittently 3 times. Even at dawn, his vision was still blurry. Su Fengyan raised his head. The last torrential rain had just stopped. The sky was still covered in dark clouds, but with the passage of time, the sunlight shone through the gaps in the dark clouds, illuminating the earth with pillar after pillar of light. From the courtyard next door came the muffled sounds of collisions. It was Yu Dilong and Lu Yunzhang, who had temporarily not followed the great snow dragon cavalry to Liangzhou's northern front, exchanging pointers. The 2 disciples didn't use weapons. In close combat, both sides' fists met flesh. Whoever couldn't take it and had to take 3 steps back first would lose. Not long after, the oldest, but only the youngest disciple, Lu Yunzhang, shouted that he was going to take that frost-covered long blade. Yu Dilong, who was probably the youngest, but was the eldest disciple, ignored him. The courtyard returned to silence. Su Fengyan felt a bit of regret. It wasn't that he was like a fan of martial arts and reluctant to leave, nor was it that he had sunk so deeply into the feeling of being unrivaled in the world. Rather, it was that if his cultivation was still at the peak, when he heard that Beimang imperial tutor had Hong Jingyan, Zhongliang, and Murong Baoding as backup, his hands and feet would not have been tied. But then again, if he, Su Fengyan, was still fully deserving of the title of new martial emperor Taiping Ling to Oba Qiun, and the others would not have appeared. Su Fengyan reckoned that if he were to fight in close quarters in terms of cultivation level, he, Su Fengyan, could still be considered a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. He was only slightly inferior to Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Tai, Chao Chongqing, Su Yanbing, Huyen Daguan, and Chun Jibao. However, if it were a life-and-death situation, Su Fengyan would place someone whose reputation had plummeted into the top 3 Gu Jiantang. Su Fengyan walked out of the study and stood on the steps. A short and skinny armored old man strode into the courtyard alone. Su Fengyan did not deliberately assume a welcoming posture. He waited until the old man, whose armor still had traces of rain on it, walked up the steps. Su Fengyan walked with him to the study. There was already a pot of hot tea on the table, but there were no teacups. Instead, there were 2 large bowls. It was none other than Yen Wenluan. The one-eyed old man poured a bowl and drank it in one gulp. Then, Yen Wenluan placed her fists on her knees and looked at Su Fengyan, as if she was going to denounce him. Su Fengyan waited for her to continue. This old general was the biggest mountain in the Beiliang army. After the previous cavalry commander, Zhong Hangu, fell, Yuan Zuozong had just succeeded. Yen Wenluan, who had firmly held the power of the Beiliang infantry, could be said to be the biggest force. But many border soldiers and Beiliang people did not know a secret. The Beiliang army, or more accurately the Su family army, was divided into 2 factions from the start. One faction was led by the gentle strategist, Li Yishan. After the Battle of the Western Fortress, he advocated that Su Shao immediately go north and return to the capital. The other faction was led by the more radical Zhao Chongling. They wanted to take half of the country in one go, and tried to divide and defend themselves. They wanted to share the world with the Zhao family in the north and south. In the end, they would fight a battle similar to the Battle of the Western Fortress to decide who the world belonged to. This potential split spread until Su Shao was made a king and became a vassal. Su Fengyan's uncle, Wuxia, was disheartened at that time and chose to leave the army. There was also Su Pu, who later hid his name in Beimang's Dunhuang city. Many people under these 2 generals were also impulsive and left Su Zhao's side. Could be said that the victory of Li Yishan's faction was a Pyrrhic victory. In the eyes of many old people in the Beiliang army, this meant that Li Yishan had single-handedly created Su Zhao's home, Beiliang, Zhao world structure. Could not be said to be wrong, but it was very mediocre. More importantly, Zhao Chongling had died in his prime due to illness, causing this faction to lose its backbone. Adding on the many people Zhao Chongling had raised, the Beiliang army, led by Yen Wenluan, a famous general from the spring and autumn period, was unwilling and did not dare to interfere in the family matters of the Su family. Many years later, Chun Jibao rode alone to western Shu in a fit of pique. Yan Wenluan suddenly sighed and poured a cup of tea for himself. He thought and then poured tea for the bowl in front of Su Fengnian. The old man held up the large bowl and said emotionally, "All these years, I have always had a knot in my heart. I went to Clear Cold Mountain so many times, but purposely did not go to Tide Listening Pavilion to see Surly. The general tried to persuade me once, but gave me a lame excuse. After that, the general did not mention this matter." Su Fengnian didn't say some casual words. Instead, he went straight to the point and said, "My master never regretted his decision back then when he was alive. He always believed that if he wanted to fight for the world, Su Shao and the Su family's armored cavalry wouldn't have the momentum. Those who wanted to become a minister of the dragon were delusional. It's not that Su Fengnian does not respect Sir Zhao, and it's not that I'm just standing there and talking without feeling any pain or taking advantage of the situation. In Tide Listening Pavilion, my master, Chancellor Wang, and my second sister repeatedly deduced the situation back then. The conclusion was the same." Yan Wenluan's expression was complicated. He drank a mouthful of tea and shook the large white bowl. He laughed self-deprecatingly. "Back then, at the crucial moment when the prince was about to succeed to the throne, I, Yan Wenluan, was also guessing who to use to establish my might. After thinking it over and over again, there was one most likely and one least likely. The former was to make an eyesore like me obediently take off my armor and retire to the countryside. The least likely was to take down the Huaihua great general. Regardless of whether Zhong Hongwu's conduct is good or bad, in the eyes of the capital, he has always been an important character that the great general used to restrict me and Chun Jibao." Su Fengnian calmly said, "If it was still a peaceful and prosperous time, I would definitely choose Zhong Hongwu. I would not even hesitate to let him choose a trusted aide to become the Protector General of Beiliang after he retired from the border army. I would also think of ways to make you, Yan Wenluan, unable to protect your integrity in your old age. I would slowly cut off your wings and remove Sir Zhao's Lufeng legacy. I would make Chun Jibao completely a loner with power but not great power. Chun Jibao's brand in the Beiliang army would naturally gradually fade." Yan Wenluan laughed coldly. "The prince is indeed Sir Li's proud disciple. You are indeed good at scheming and are most adept at schemes to destroy the enemy." Su Fengnian did not take it to heart. He raised his hand and laughed softly. "Cold words hurt, but fortunately there is still hot tea to warm the heart. Drink, drink, drink." The old general of Beiliang, who was known for his unyielding temperament, did not flip the table and shed all pretense of cordiality on the spot. Instead, he drank a mouthful of hot tea with a straight face. The atmosphere in the room was stiff. Su Fengnian was the first to break the silence. But it was a digression. "I heard that Nalan Yusi said that he wanted to join forces with Xie Feiyu to evaluate the new martial arts evaluation, Rouge evaluation, and general evaluation." Yan Wenluan said unhappily, "Those lousy things are just scholars looking for trouble when they have nothing better to do." Su Fengnian drank the tea and put down the teacup. With a solemn expression, he said in a deep voice, "Then today I will tell the old general about a serious matter that several scholars have done together. Yes, for people." Yan Wenluan frowned. Su Fengnian said 4 names. They were Huang Longshi, Li Yishan of Tide Listening Pavilion, Nalan Yusi of Nanjiang, Liang Emperor Xiyuan Benshi. Yan Wenluan subconsciously sat up straight. Chapter 1404. Su Fengnian pushed away the teapot and teacup, drew a line on the table with 2 fingers and said slowly, "Before the spring and autumn period, since the establishment of the Great Qin dynasty, every time the nomadic tribes in the north launched a raid, or the internal turmoil in the Central Plains, the scholars of the Central Plains all migrated to the south to avoid the disaster. In history, there were several large-scale river crossings, but the imperial family always went from the north to the south, only moving south and then moving south again. There has never been a northern crossing of the Guangling River. Among them, the Lu family, in the last years of the Yongxi dynasty, and the Ganlu southbound, after the fall of Dafeng, were the most typical examples. It can be said that the Chujiang of the 9 kingdoms of the spring and autumn was able to become the leader because the Ganlu southbound gave them the orthodox identity of the Central Plains. The opposite of the past, Hongjia fled north. Everyone knows that there were 2 routes, one of which was to migrate to the capital of the Liang Kingdom, Taiyan City. After that, most of the people were from the Song, Wei, and Sui dynasties, mixed with a small number of people from the West Chu and Southern Tang. Su Fengyan drew a slightly curved line on the table again. After that, about half a year later, an unprecedented exodus involving more nobles began. West Chu, who had the strongest character, Southern Tang, who loved debauchery and extravagance, and Western Shu, who had the most attachment to their homeland, all appeared in this flood. Dozens of people, big and small, finally converged at the current Liangyu River 3 prefectures and entered the Beimang Gusai and Longyao prefectures, resulting in the current southern dynasty of Beimang. Yan Wenwan nodded and said, "At that time, after Chu Lushan's thousands of cavalry entered Shu, we used infantry to defeat the Western Shu army. Gu Jiantang was lucky, but great ancestor Gu, who was the pillar of Southern Tang, was unlucky. We took down Southern Tang almost without bloodshed. The 8 emperors either hung themselves, burned themselves, or became prisoners. That's why the old emperor of Liang said, 'Finally, we can use the Zhao family's peace to bring peace to the world.' But what did this have to do with those 4 people? Rumor has it that Mr. Li and Nalen Yusi once traveled through the spring and autumn period together. Even if it is true, each of them served their own master, and they would absolutely not work together. Not to mention that our Beiliang's men of sacrifice have tried many times to kill half of Banshi's tongue." Yan Wenwan sneered and said, "Your Highness, although I, Yan Wenwan, am a boorish person, I still know some things about the world outside of war. If you say that these 4 people sat at a table like us and plotted for Hongjia to escape to the north, I would really laugh my head off. That's not the way to brag about not needing a draft." Su Fengyan's expression was as usual. He shook his head and said, "Let's take 10,000 steps back and assume that the 4 of them, each with their own camp and each with their own plans, had gathered together to make a plan. How could the Beimang peace magistrate, who had been traveling in the Central Plains for more than 20 years, not have noticed any clues?" Yan Wenwan couldn't help but laugh angrily and said, "Then why did you say that, Your Highness?" Su Fengyan looked at the old general calmly. For the first time, the old general didn't glare back. He just smiled awkwardly and waved his hand. "Go on, I won't talk nonsense." Su Fengyan continued. "Huang Sanjia, who used his 3-inch tongue to mess up the spring and autumn period, actually didn't do anything in this unprecedented change in 1,000 years. The reason why he was dragged into this was because without him, there wouldn't have been the unification of Liang, and Hongjia wouldn't have escaped to the north. If we talk about the spring and autumn period, Huang Longsher definitely can't be ignored. It will be the same in the history books in the future. Huang Sanjia used his glib tongue to form alliances, while my father used his cavalry and Su Dao to sink the Shenzhou continent. Thus, a new problem appeared in front of some people. Although the Central Plains matter was settled, there was still a neighbor in the north who was eyeing covetously. This evil neighbor from the north who would occasionally come to the southern neighbor's house to steal things was even more vulgar and barbaric than the uncivilized Liang in the eyes of the West Chu scholars. Since Liang was able to conquer the Central Plains, then wouldn't it be possible for Beimang, who revered military force, to take a step further and swallow up Liang? Yan Wenwan was stunned and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. He was only a martial artist who led troops into battle. He really hadn't considered this difficult problem. When the great general was alive, almost all of the Beiliang people, including Yan Wenwan, had a strong sense of self-confidence. That was, with the 300,000 Beiliang border troops, the Beimang barbarians could forget about taking a single step south into the Central Plains. What reason did this need? No need. After the great general passed away, it was not long before the million-strong army of the northern barbarians came knocking on the border. Yan Wenwan didn't have much time to think about it. As for Hongjia running north, who would care about such an old matter? Su Fengyan paused for a long time, as if he was thinking about how to phrase it. When Yan Wenwan looked over with an inquisitive expression, he said, "My master was never willing to mention Nalen Yusi, who was also a strategist. But it's true that he was an old acquaintance with this person. My master didn't tell me about this plan when he was still alive. I discovered it myself from clues. Chun Shiliang was on the top floor of the tide-listening pavilion looking through his handwritten notes. At the end of last year, he sent a secret letter to Mount Qingliang, which confirmed my guess. I can conclude that my master must have thought of setting up this big plan at the beginning. The initial idea probably occurred at the end of the Battle of the Western Fortress. Conquering West Chu was equivalent to cleaning up the mess that Huang Sanjia had created. I guess that when he accompanied Su Shao north to the capital, he might have met Nalan Yusi, who was traveling north with Zhao Bing, the Prince of Yanqi. It's also possible that the two of them didn't meet at all, but they had a very secretive exchange of letters. Old General Mu should have more or less known about what happened later. Su Shao, who had lost soldiers and generals in West Chu, had just become the king of Beiliang in the imperial court when he announced that he would wash the Guangling River with blood before conquering the northwest. He wanted the corpses of West Chu scholars to block the mouth of the river. Not long after, Zhao Bing also became the Prince of Yanqi, who had the widest territory. Moreover, very soon, there was the shocking tragedy of the remnants of the Southern Tang's army killing the 3,000 soldiers left behind in Liang. The grievous news was urgently transmitted to the capital from 800 li away. At that time, Zhao Bing's mood must have been very bad, because according to his military achievements, he should have been bestowed with the richest Guangling road in the world. There was simply no place for Zhao Yi. As a result, the southern border gave him a show of strength, which was tantamount to pouring oil on the fire. Among the vassals, Zhao Bing, who was the most bloodthirsty, should have been furious. According to common sense, there was a rumor in the unofficial history that Zhao Bing chopped down a cypress tree with a saber, swearing to kill all the young men of the Southern Tang. Yan Wenluan made a sound of agreement. This matter is indeed true. At the time, the great general even told us about it as a joke. The old man suddenly made a sound of surprise. But if I remember correctly, at that time, when the old emperor was rewarding meritorious officials, the great general squeezed out Gu Jiantang to become the king of Beiliang. No one dared to say anything. Gu Jiantang could only be the minister of war who stayed in the capital. He could only fiddle with that tattered Gu hut under the noses of the two emperors. What was the saying? Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Chatting with the emperor?" Yan Wenluan smiled and nodded. Yes. Then Yan Wenluan returned to the topic and said, "But at first, the imperial court intended to let Zhao Bing be the king of Huainan. Not to mention the distant southern border where the emperor was even the king of Jing and could not be. He could only be the king of Huainan, helping the Zhao family in Liang to keep an eye on the great general. Zhao Bing was certainly not happy, so he asked to go to the Tu Liao to be the king of Jiaodong. The great general later told us that Zhao Bing had a private chat with the old emperor. He said that he was not willing to eat the dust behind the great general and wanted to go to the Tu Liao to fight the Beimang barbarians. He said that even if Zhao Bing were to die, he would die on the back of a horse. But the result was unexpected. Zhao Bing became the king of Yen. Although he was not as good as Zhao Duan's brother, Zhao Yi, he was still much better than the king of Huainan, Zhao Ying, who had been oppressed for most of his life. Yan Wenluan patted her knee heavily and said in a deep voice, "In this way, it makes sense. If you want to drive away the remnants of the spring and autumn period and force them to cross the Guangling River, you have to force Shu, Chu, and Tang, who should be the most unwilling to leave their homeland. Especially those aristocratic families with 100 years of country, 1,000 years of family. They will not be willing to be homeless dogs after the fall of their country. Your Highness, in this it was Yuan Banshi, the fourth counselor who later became the teacher of the Emperor of Liang, who contributed and did something, right? What? Did Mr. Li really have an unknown relationship with this person?" Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "No, Yuan Banshi was just plotting for the Zhao family." Yan Wenluan imperceptibly turned into a child who was seeking advice from a teacher. She asked curiously, "Your Highness, what do you mean?" However, Su Fengyan was distracted. Yan Wenluan was somewhat helpless. The old man did not have the face to ask again. Moreover, even if Su Fengyan did not say anything, she, Yan Wenluan, could not think for herself. Then, the old man seriously pondered for a moment and suddenly said loudly, "After rushing for so long, just drinking tea is boring. It's not enough. Your Highness, would you like some wine?" Su Fengyan smiled and got up to get the wine. When he returned to the study with 2 pots of green ant wine, Yen Wenluan could not wait to open a pot and drank 3 mouthfuls in succession before stopping. She wiped her mouth and said with a smile, "Your Highness said that Yuan Benshi was plotting for the emperor of Zhao family. Does it mean that Yuan Benshi was not at ease with those deep-rooted maggots in the 8 kingdoms? Since he did not like them, he was afraid that they would cause trouble and delay Zhao Duan from launching the war against Beimang after he ascended the throne. He was worried that these remnants would stab him in the back, so he simply drove them out. This is the same logic as the scholars of Liang having to be officials in foreign lands." Yen Wenluan, who had finally thought of this step, began to doubt herself very quickly. She had no choice but to ask again. But Yuan Benshi was willing to let so many so-called noble clans go to Beimang in one go? Chapter 1405. At this point, Yen Wenluan suddenly woke up. His eyes suddenly became cold, and his tone also became somewhat indifferent. He stared fixedly at Su Fengnian. Since the first year of Yonghui, Liang has issued a heavy law. 10 caddies of ironware, 1 craftsman. Once someone enters Beimang, the local officials must migrate for 3,000 li. For so many years, many people on the borders took risks out of desperation, and because of this, they became rich. Afterwards, there were few investigations. But in our northern Liang, in the past 20 years, under Mr. Li's orders, we have killed more than 10 surplus generals and lieutenants with real power. Yen Wenluan clenched the big white bowl on the edge of the table that was filled with hot tea and strong wine. He narrowed his eyes and said gloomily, "Since Wang Ye told me about this Beimang fleeing to the north, naturally there must be a deep meaning. Even if you beat me to death, I don't believe that Mr. Li and that Nalin Yusi wanted to greatly increase Beimang's strength. That's why Beimang gained the southern dynasty for no reason, as well as the nearly 1 million Chuanqiu adherents who constantly talk about the Central Plains as the new era. But if Wang Ye can't give me an explanation today, then I will boldly demand an explanation from Wang Ye on behalf of the dead soldiers of Crouching Bao and Luanhe cities, as well as all the Beiliang frontier army soldiers who died in battle." Su Fengnian wasn't in a hurry to explain anything. Instead, he dipped his finger in the wine and bent over to point at the north and south ends of the table. "To accomplish this, we must first form a situation where we close the door and beat the dog. Zhao Bing, who threatened to kill all the young and strong men of southern Tang, is doing the dirty work of raiding the base. In fact, he did kill tens of thousands of southern Tang's surrendered soldiers as soon as he arrived at Nanjiang. Among these people, only a few thousand truly had the intention to rebel. Most of the others died unjustly. Someone has done the raiding, but someone has to close the door. Su Shao is doing this. It's just that back then, he led the army to Nanjiang and moved exceptionally slowly. Yuan Benshi, who felt that he was tricked by my master and Nalin Yusi, was trying to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. Like you, Yuan Benshi hoped that those influential families would die under the tree, so that they wouldn't affect his primary task of assisting Zhao Dun in the war against Beimang. However, Yuan Benshi also didn't want Su Shao to rush north in the latter half of the year and actually go straight to his archenemy Beimang. His original intention was for Su Zhao's army to speed up and block the northwest gate before that, so that this flock of cattle and sheep to be slaughtered could be driven back to the capital region and stay with the flood of northern Tang's army. Therefore, the imperial court ordered Gu Jiantong's trusted general, Kai Nan, to rush west. However, at that time, neither Su Shao nor the Ji province's Han family stopped him for their own reasons. As a result, Kai Nan, who didn't have many cavalry troops at that time, didn't succeed. After that, Liang didn't dare to do anything to Su Shao, but you, the Han family, can't take care of him? Therefore, the imperial court quickly executed the entire Han family. Back then, a fish escaped the net and became a loyal martyr. It was just a matter of an imperial edict. Back then, Zhang Julu presided over this matter because he truly wanted to exterminate the Han family. However, to say that he was influenced by his master and killed people out of personal grudges is to underestimate him. After Su Fengnian raised the wine pot, he didn't drink. The reason why Yuan Benshi didn't pursue this matter is very simple. After several major battles, Liang lost one battle after another, and the Zhao family's elites suffered heavy losses. Then, He suddenly discovered that Beimang was busy digesting the southern court and wanted to finish it off in one fell swoop in a few years. This allowed the Liang imperial court, which was under Zhao Dun's rule, to take a breather and work hard bit by bit. In addition, Yuan Bunshi didn't think that, in the future, Liang would lose to Beimang in a competition of national strength. Hong Jia's northward journey gradually became a rotten debt that no one cared about. The Liang imperial court didn't dare to make a sound because this was the only reverse scale that Zhao Dun, who was known for his open-mindedness and magnanimity, couldn't touch. Yan Wenwan, who was about to throw her bowl and fall out with him, frowned and asked, "So you're saying that the northward journey was a burden to Beimang?" Yan Wenwan quickly shook her head and said, "No. Although the remnants of the spring and autumn period did weaken Beimang's martial spirit to a certain extent, to that old woman, accepting these people had far more advantages than disadvantages. Now that they were attacking Gourd Mouth in Yuzhou and Huta City in Liangzhou, this point was already proven. Their method of attacking cities was no different from that of the Central Plains. Taking Gourd Mouth as an example, that vanguard General Zhongtan even had the leisure to train his troops when he attacked Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City. On the surface, he only attacked one side of the city with the Crouching Bao City. On the surface, it looked no different from children playing house. But soon, when he attacked Luanhe City, he began to try to encircle 3 and block 1. Even after he broke through the city, he was so cruel to both the enemy and himself that he intentionally fought in the alleys to enter the city. Now that they were attacking Shaguang City, the Beimang infantrymen were becoming more and more skilled, and the number of casualties on the local battlefield had sharply decreased. They were already so careful in attacking Beiliang. In the future, if Beimang really had the opportunity to attack those cities in the Central Plains, who else could defend those cities other than Western Shu and the two Liao provinces? The army of King Zhaobing of Yen? If the northern barbarians attacked all the way to Nanjiang, would there still be any meaning? Even if we don't talk about the battlefield, that Taiping order had already prepared a plan for how to quickly fill in a large number of skilled civil officials after Beiliang was taken. This would stabilize the rear defense and allow Beimang's cavalry to advance south without any worries. If this were 20 years ago, even if Beimang dared to think about it, it would never have been able to do it. Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "Old General, have you ever wondered why Su Xiao and Li Yishan didn't oppose me going to Beimang at all, and instead supported me?" Yan Wenlwan's expression was still gloomy, but there was no longer any trace of the murderous intent from before. She gently shook her head. Su Fengyan looked out the window at the sky that was beginning to brighten. He slowly put down the wine pot and said softly, "Old General, wait patiently. Back then, when I went to Beimang alone, it was only to pass on a message to some people. It was very risky, wasn't it? But if I didn't take such a risk, how could I make others willingly take an even greater risk? As for who in Beimang didn't forget their original intentions back then, I don't know, but there are definitely many of them. If I didn't know, that old woman in Beimang and the Taiping order wouldn't be able to guess." Yan Wenluan was dumbstruck. Su Fengyan stood up and lowered his head to look at the table where the wine stains had long since disappeared. "Perhaps you'll ask, can those scholars be trusted?" Su Fengyan laughed to himself. "A few years ago, whoever dared to nod their head, I just took it as a joke. But of all the scholars in the world, just in the spring and autumn period that we've all experienced, there was Wang Mingyang who defended Shangfan City to the death for 10 years, and Zhang Julu who brought about his own destruction." Yan Wenluan exhaled and said bitterly, "There was Wei Jingtang in Jizhou. In reality, in the spring and autumn period, there were quite a few scholars who were willing to die. Of course, Yan Wenluan, killed quite a few with my own hands." Su Fengyan walked to the window. Huang Sanjia once said that in this world, there will definitely be more and more people who can read and write. The general trend is also unstoppable. The hearts of the people are no longer what they used to be, and public morals are deteriorating day by day. But just because you've read and know how to read, you can't become a scholar, like Huang Sanjia said. Su Fengyan stretched out his hand and slowly clenched it into a fist. "The more you know, the more you hold, the less you revere. This is human nature. A few years ago, His Royal Highness, who didn't practice the saber again, dared to be disrespectful to the Celestials? The mind is restless, the mind is restless. Taoism has the warning of the mind is restless, the mind is restless. Buddhism also has the saying control the mind is restless. But the specific methods are too vague and vague. Reading and writing have always been a luxury for the common people, and they can't do it. Confucianism is very simple and clear. One word: propriety. Propriety is a framework, but it's actually more like a cage. The common people don't understand, but it doesn't matter. We set down very detailed rules and you just have to follow. I think that one of the important reasons why Confucianism was able to stand out among the 100 schools of thought and eventually suppress the other schools is because of this. Of course, everyone likes to be free and unrestrained. Freedom is their nature. Under this kind of almost irreconcilable conflict, Confucianism and Moism had a huge disagreement. The Confucian sage had long since proposed that human nature is good. Later generations of sages constantly used various methods to subtly influence people. For example, when a child picked up a book, he had to memorize it, or else he would be beaten 300 times. In the end, this was the result of education. But what's interesting is that the Taoist sage came out to interrupt. He said that the sage abandoned wisdom, and the common people benefited 100 times. Abandoned benevolence, and the common people returned to filial piety. Who is right and who is wrong? Perhaps there is no right or wrong. Huang Sanjia destroyed the spring and autumn period. What he did was only to give the people of the world an opportunity to have a choice called freedom earlier. And Zhang Julu, a scholar who had been a tailor for Liang for a full 20 years, used his own death to sow a framework in advance for this freedom of the later generations that he had behind the back of the Zhao family. Perhaps Zhang Julu's efforts were futile and meaningless, but since he could think of it and do it, then he would do it. This is Zhang Julu. I Su Fengyan can't do it. Yu Yen Wenluan can't do it. Those famous ministers of spring of eternal Hui can't do it. Even Tantanan and Qi Yanglong can't do it. In fact, other than him, no one can do it. Perhaps Huang Sanjia, who had no other choice but to scourge the people of the world with his 3-inch tongue, didn't say to us, "Know me, sin me," only the spring and autumn period. The former Grand Secretary Zhang Julu, who didn't have a single will or last words, should have smiled and left behind a sentence for the later generations who treated him like a fool. You are not a fish. How can you know the bitterness and happiness of a fish? Yen Wenluan carried a wine pot and stood beside Su Fengyan. This was his first time listening to Su Fengyan's long-winded speech. When this young man was killing people in Lingzhou and Yuzhou, he wasn't this long-winded. But Yen Wenluan wasn't annoyed at all. Yen Wenluan put one hand behind his back and poured wine into his mouth with the other. After drinking it all, he shook the wine pot and asked, "Then what about Mr. Li?" When Yen Wenluan turned his head, he saw the young man smile and point his finger to the north. Su Fengyan's face had a charm that a crude martial artist like Yen Wenluan was destined not to have. Chapter 1406. Don't people say that my master is vicious and merciless, and that he likes to exterminate people? Hong Jia went north because he exterminated the potential scholars in the Central Plains, and then he went to Beiliang. Those 100,000 refugees were just a small part of his plan. Next, it's probably Beiliang. Yen Wenluan sighed, then laughed heartily. Your Highness, the knot in my heart is gone. It's funny. When I first came to Yanji County, I wanted to be thick-skinned and flatter you. You and Yu Luandao fought beautifully in those battles outside the gourd. The establishment of no retreat camp boosted the morale of the entire Yuzhou. I didn't expect things to change. Just now, I almost wanted to flip the table and beat you up. Of course, the end result would be me being casually beaten up by you. Although your Highness didn't make it clear, I, Yen Wenluan, believe in the great general and Sir Li. After confirming this, I also understand why Sir Li didn't look favorably on Chen Jibao from the beginning. With Hong Jia going north and leaving Beiliang to him, after the battle with Beiliang, there will definitely be another unjust war in the eyes of scholars in the future. Su Fengyan didn't say anything. He looked somewhat tired. Yen Wenluan hesitated, but still said, Your Highness, there's something I can't say. It's uncomfortable to keep it in my stomach. Although Chen Jibao left Beiliang, Yan Wenluan, can guarantee that after staying in Beiliang for so many years, he has never rebelled. He's definitely dissatisfied with you, but he definitely doesn't have any malicious intent to kill. I believe that he's just waiting. If after the great general leaves, Su Fengyan can't support Beiliang, then he'll come out and let Beiliang take the surname Chan. As for what the world will take in the end, whether it's Morong, Zhao, or Chan, it'll depend on Chan Jibao's ability. Su Fengyan smiled. I know. Yan Wenluan asked softly. Really? Su Fengyan turned his head. Then I don't know? Yan Wenluan laughed heartily. Looks like you really do know. It's Yan Wenluan who gauged the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure. Su Fengyan laughed along with him. Isn't it just scolding people? Yan Wenluan was startled at first, but after thinking for a while, the smile in her single eye became even brighter. However, she deliberately said helplessly, the eloquence of a scholar is indeed impressive. I have no choice but to be impressed. In the end, the commander of Beiliang's infantry rushed over and cupped his fists. Your Highness, let's go. Like what we said when we met in Yuzhou province, if there's a chance, even if I, Yan Wenluan, am lying in a coffin, I will also be carried to the palace of Beimang. Without waiting for Su Fengyan to say anything, the old man turned and strode away. When he passed by the table, he stopped and shouted, Catch it! He picked up the wine pot and threw it to Su Fengyan. Just treat it as this general treating Wang Ye to a drink. Su Fengyan raised his hand to catch the wine pot. Looking at the figure that had already crossed the threshold, he was astonished and muttered to himself, There's actually a guest who uses the host's wine to treat others to a meal? Yan Wenluan strode down the corridor. At that time, the old man had wanted to say, I believe in you, Su Fengyan. After I believe in the great general, I believe in Mr. Li. But at that time, he held himself back. Now, he was muttering to himself, Great general, fighting a war like this is interesting. Just like when I followed the grand general in the past. I'm not afraid of anything but death. Su Fengyan, who hadn't drunk a single drop of wine from beginning to end, sat back in his seat with a somewhat solemn expression. That cultured and refined fourth prince, Zhao Zhuan, wasn't someone to be trifled with after becoming the emperor. If Zhang Julu's death was ordered by his father, Zhao Zhuan, then Yuan Bunxi's silent death was completely caused by Zhao Zhuan's cold-blooded methods. However, Su Fengyan wasn't surprised by this. Which of the three emperors of the Zhao clan wasn't an expert in cooking the hound after the rabbit had been caught? The reason why this prince of Liang, who had just ascended to the dragon throne, secretly opened the door to Ji City was not because he had nothing better to do than to give the two generals of Beimang some military exploits. It was because after Liang and Beiliang both changed their heirs, Su Fengyan was the first to go against the imperial edict and took the initiative to express the bottom line of the Beiliang. After Zhao Zhuan ascended to the throne, he quickly returned the favor by using the incident where Yu province's 10,000 cavalrymen invaded Ji City, telling Su Fengyan that the bottom line of the Liang imperial court was not low either. Meanwhile, after Yuan Tingshan lost Silver Sparrow City, he atoned for his crime with military exploits. Like his father, Zhao Zhuan, who paid close attention to the military affairs of Ji City, Su Fengyan had just received intelligence that apart from the Ji City cavalry, the man who had transformed from Mad Dog Yuan to General Yuan also brought along more than 7,000 elite cavalrymen that were given to him by one of his two fathers-in-law, the head of the Yanbao clan. They waited patiently for the opportunity to strike, and defeated the 8,000 cavalrymen of Beimang, Great Ru Shiwei and Wang Jingchong. The report of victory that was delivered to Tai and City stated, We lost less than 3,000 men, but we beheaded more than 10,000 enemies. Naturally, Su Fengyan knew very well that the 2,000 cavalrymen of Yanbao Li family that had been accumulated by generations of Yanbao Li family was definitely not included in the 3,000 casualties. However, after this battle, Zhao Zhuan, who had just ascended to the throne, would surely be pleased. The Ministry of War in the capital city, which was already badly battered by Guangling Dao, would also be happy. The morale of the two Liao soldiers on the Eastern Front would also be boosted. In fact, if it weren't for Su Fengyan being the biggest target in the world, even if Yuan Tingshan had achieved several times more military exploits, he would only attract mockery and suspicion. Su Fengyan sneered, Compared to me, who is widely acknowledged to be the Bailiang son of His Royal Highness, you, Yuan Tingshan, have quite a good life. What truly gave Su Fengnian a headache wasn't Yuan Tingshan and Jizhou, but two other matters. In reality, Zhao Zhuan had done many things after the beginning of spring. For example, the relocation of the Hanlin Academy and the suggestion of a small minister from the Ministry of Revenue to rewrite the world's records into the small court he and the central government officials had established. Compared to the former, Bailiang's situation was completely different. The people of Bailiang had temporarily stabilized. Those who should leave and those who could leave had already left. They were mainly concentrated in the Bailiang circuit in Lingzhou, so there wasn't much of an impact. If the records were changed at this time, it would be the same as opening a big hole. Even though Bailiang's military households were the majority, it involved the people at the bottom of the hierarchy. If they could leave, who would be willing to wait for death within Bailiang's borders? Su Fengnian closed his eyes. The Minister of Revenue, Yuan Gua, who was the most talkative on this matter, kept his mouth shut. His silence was already a very clear stance. Unfortunately, it wasn't easy for him to make a comeback. He'd only been an earthly court disciple for a few days before he'd probably be banished to the cold palace again. The head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, supported it. Tantanan, the minister of the gate, opposed it. In Maochun, the heavenly official, supported it. However, he said that this matter should be slowed down rather than rushed. TSK. This wording was really meticulous. Not rushed, easy but not suitable. It was really exquisite. The second head of the secretariat, Zhao Yuling, really did sing the opposite of Yin Maochun. As expected of someone who didn't have any future in the same year as the imperial examination. He became an ally, and the promising became a political enemy. If this wasn't an urgent matter, then there was a small matter that was hidden among all the other important matters. It was the real unexpected surprise and urgent matter for the entire Bailiang circuit. The unexpected surprise was another hidden move of Zhang Julu's after his disciple Wei Jingtang. If it weren't for the cheating case of the Liang transport that was deliberately downplayed by the imperial court, Su Fengnian wouldn't have been able to follow the vine to the melon and figure out Zhang Julu's intentions. It turned out that for all these years, Zhang Julu and Tantanan had been keeping an eye on the transport, especially on the matter of the cooling grain. They seemed to be creating difficulties in every possible way, but they actually secretly had people privately store grain. The granaries in the gray area were all along the Guangling River, further northwest of Xiangfan City. Su Fengnian dared to say that Zhang Julu was waiting. He was waiting for Bailiang to really be willing to fight to the death with the Beimang army. Then these grain that originally belonged to Bailiang would be smoothly delivered into Bailiang's territory. If Bailiang was hiding its strength, Su Xiao and Su Fengnian had the intention to preserve their strength and set up a separatist regime. In that case, these grain provisions would be impossible to obtain. Zhang Julu had once decided to reform the transport, the Su officials, and the Guangling floods. In the end, they all died without a result. It might have been because of this kind of selfish motives that he had to cut them off. How difficult and complicated it was to govern a country. Just the matter of secretly storing grain involved a series of cumbersome appointments for the officials in charge of the transport of grain. It also involved the relatives of the emperor who lay on the lifeline of the country and the merit of the founding of the country. In the game of interests with these vermin and rats, Zhang Julu not only had to ensure that the blood of the country flowed without hindrance, but he also had to ensure that after Bailiang really did fight to the death with Beimang, the court or his current Grand Secretary Zhang Julu could also show some sincerity. More importantly, he had to maintain a balance between the emperor and the nobles. Now, Zhao Zhuan had personally turned this unexpected surprise into an urgent matter. The transport officials that Zhang Julu had arranged for were all wiped out. Their official ranks were not high, and the nobles did not care about these unimportant officials who were not their lackeys. Perhaps without these people they would gain even more in the future. Furthermore, the emperor's iron fist and determination to deal with corruption received praise from the court. After this turmoil, who would dare to go against the imperial court? In the future, it would only be more difficult for Bailiang to obtain grain. Su Fengnian bent his fingers and knocked on the table again and again. Chapter 1407. With less than 2 million households in Beiliang, there were less than 10 million people, but they had to feed an entire 300,000 border soldiers. If it wasn't for the support of Lingzhou, known as the northwestern Little Guangling, Beiliang, which had been stretched for more than 20 years, would have snapped a long time ago, let alone shoot arrows. How was Li Gongda able to become the head of the civil officials, Beiliang's administrator? Was it because he only knew how to sing praises to Su Xiao and only knew how to curry favor with him? Of course not. There was no other reason. Li Gongda knew how to make money. He was able to buy grain through all kinds of shady channels, and the prices were not high. The big shots who accepted the boxes of silver as bribes were, of course, the relatives of the imperial family and the descendants of meritorious deeds. The imperial court was losing a lot of money, and they only earned a small amount of less than 1,000,000 taels a year. Their ancestors and fathers had all sacrificed their lives for Beiliang to unify the spring and autumn period and made great contributions. What did they have to feel guilty about earning some silver? In the short term, these people should not have the guts to get into trouble. Li Gongda, who was still the administrator, ran to Mount Qingliang and complained to the deputy administrator Song Dongming. Official Li, who had always maintained himself well, would soon have his hair covered in white. Under this kind of grim situation, Provincial Governor Su Beiji, who had been hoarding grain like crazy in Lingzhou last year, quickly built and filled more than half of the granaries in his hands. At the time, he was ridiculed as the granary provincial governor, who only knew how to buy rice. In one fell swoop, he became the entire Beiliang border army's savior. If it wasn't for Su Beiji, Su Fengyan would also pay attention to the granaries. But it was impossible for him to be as bold and decisive as Su Beiji to use the power of an entire province to hoard grain. Su Beiji was in charge of buying grain in Lingzhou, and it could be said that he was unscrupulous. Not only did he use the connections that Li Gongda had accumulated over the years to buy grain outside of Beiliang at a high price, he also forcefully bought rice from the local tyrants and aristocrats in Lingzhou at a low price. If the people who had surplus grain wanted to sell it to earn the difference, Su Beiji would buy it all. Therefore, if it weren't for Su Beiji's granaries, Su Fengyan wouldn't have openly gone to Beiliang to steal grain from his distant relatives and neighbors. He wouldn't have been kind enough to let people lead troops out of the border to borrow grain. At the very least, he would have given some real money. However, this was not a long-term plan after all. Before long, the entire upper reaches of Guangling River would be cleared of Beiliang. Su Fengyan opened his eyes and muttered, "In the beginning, it was you, Chan Shiliang, who lost the salt, iron, and grain, and was banished to the land of refugees. Su Beiji first became the provincial governor of a province. Then, it was you who contributed greatly in defending Liuzhou, smoothly allowing Beiliang to have more than 100,000 young and strong soldiers. Then, it was Su Beiji who became the provincial governor of the granary. Soon after, it was Su Beiji who proved that he was right. Everyone else in Beiliang who was just watching the play was wrong. I firmly believe that you will definitely make the people of the world sit up and take notice of you. It has been like this from the very beginning." Su Fengyan looked around and stood up to fetch the 2 chest jars that the spies from the Fu Shui chamber had specially prepared. The red datewood wasn't rare, but the 2 boxes' texture respectively displayed the uncanny workmanship of the heavenly maiden scattering flowers and the boy bowing. This made the 2 red datewood boxes, which were originally worth a few taels of silver, become priceless treasures used by West Chu's imperial court. They had been distributed to the common people after the fall of West Chu. Then, when Hongjia was on his way to the north, it had wandered into the cold land and did not follow its owner into Beimang. Su Fengyan opened the 2 chest jars. The white chess pieces were the 180 famous snow prints. There were more than 20 intricate patterns on the chess pieces. The black chess pieces were the dark green fish brain jelly with a clear luster. Su Fengyan sat upright and still. He picked up a black and white chess piece and knocked it on the table that didn't have a chessboard. Then, as if he was about to start a game with someone, he placed the white chess jars across from him and softly said, "Master, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang didn't disappoint you." Su Fengyan looked at the table that seemed even more empty with the addition of the 2 chess pieces. He was in a daze. Finally, He raised his head and looked at the empty table across from him. He didn't say anything. The sky outside the window was blue and white, and the room was no longer dark. The dark clouds had dispersed, and threads of light shone in, clearly illuminating the dust that was usually invisible to the naked eye. In this room where there was only Su Fengnian, the chess pieces flew as if they were flying. As the pieces were placed, starting with the 3 words, Su Fengnian, one name after another came out of his mouth. There were names from Beiliang, Beimang, and Liang. There were dead people and living people. Some were famous, some were rising, and some were nameless. When he mentioned Lu Su, Su Fengnian paused and said, under Qi Yanglong's suggestion, Zhao Zhuan opened the 6 academies and added 6 more academicians after the 6 academicians in the palace hall. After making an exception for the old master of the Han family, he took advantage of the momentum to open the way for martial artists to use the word Wu as their title. This was to appease the civil officials, and at the same time to divide the power of the 6 ministries. During this time, it was said that the son of the Zhao family intended to disgust the king of Jing, and Yu assisted Zhao Sun. He summoned Yu to the capital to enter one of the 6 academies, the Hongwen Academy. Do you want to go? Will Zhao Sun be willing to let you go? Even if Zhao Sun can continue to bear the humiliation and have no choice but to let you leave Xiangfan City in Qingzhou alive, what price will you have to pay? Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and said, since it's difficult for you, and even more difficult for Zhao Sun, then I'll be a good person. Su Fengnian didn't turn his head, but he raised his voice and said, Mi Fengjie, Fan Shaochai, the 2 of you go to Xiangfan City and invite Lu Su to Beiliang. If he doesn't want to, then take him. Su Fengnian quickly sighed and said self-deprecatingly, forget it. If Lu Su really doesn't want to come to Beiliang, then send him to a place where he won't have to worry about Zhao Go. Su Fengnian looked across the table and said in a low voice, I'm really bad at gambling, and I'm soft-hearted. Fortunately, after so many years, Su Shao has often been lectured by you like this. I've seen it with my own eyes more than once or twice. Lowering his head, he saw that there weren't many chess pieces left in the chess jar. The table had also become densely packed with black and white chess pieces. It reminded him of the battle between the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry and the Ruran Cavalry outside the mouth of the gourd. Su Fengnian finally began to drink. Before he started practicing martial arts, he had a good tolerance for alcohol, but now he was drunk. He slumped against the back of the chair, his entire body curled up in the chair as he fell asleep. In his dreams, he repeatedly murmured, they're all gone, they're all gone. Emperor Zhao Zhuan clearly intended to follow in the tradition of the previous emperor's diligence. However, compared to the previous emperor's all-nighters, Zhao Zhuan was clearly more restrained. He even practiced a set of martial arts every morning without fail. It was taught to him by the great Zhenren of Mount Qingcheng, who together with the residents of the Taoist master of Mount Longhu, who controlled the world's Taoism. If the young emperor was said to have listened more than he spoke in that small court meeting where the entire hall was filled with purple, he rarely made any decisive decisions. Now, he was slowly beginning to possess the bearing of an emperor. Other than Qi Yanglong, Huan Wen, and a few other old people, even Zhao Yuling, who had been in charge of the Minister of Personnel for many years, was clearly beginning to feel nervous. The re-examination of the world's editions, the deliberation of the candidates for the 6 academies, the promotion and demotion of former subordinates of the Ministry of Personnel, one after another, forced Zhao Yuling to brace himself to deal with it. This made Song Tonglu feel relieved. The Liang dynasty could not afford any turbulence at this time. If there were any signs of bullying in the center of the imperial court during the sensitive time when Liang and Liang were fighting on 2 fronts, even if Song Tonglu knew that he would be labeled as a eunuch interfering in politics, he would still blow a cold wind at some people who were qualified to participate in the small court meeting. Perhaps the heavens really did bless Liang. In the beginning, the Guangling Taoist army did not achieve victory. 2 old generals who were placed high hopes on by the imperial court, one died in battle and the other was caught like a turtle in a jar and became a laughingstock. Both of them lost to young people who were almost old enough to be their grandchildren. Fortunately, the Guangling Prince Zhao Yi's trusted general named Song Li was not only a blessing general for the emperor's uncle, but also a blessing general for the entire Liang. He quickly recovered all the lost land on the eastern front of Guangling, making those remnants of West Chu, who dared to clamor all the way north to the capital, immediately lose their arrogance. On the northwest side, everyone in the imperial court was saying that Beiliang's Beiliang cavalry was just an embroidered pillow that could not withstand a single blow. Fortunately, the Jizhou general Yuan Tingshan turned the tide and completely defeated the two Beimang cavalry of more than 10,000. In comparison, who in the world did not curse the good-for-nothing Beiliang frontier army and the trembling Su Fengyan who was always hiding somewhere? Chapter 1408. Song Tonglu naturally knew many secrets that even the assistant ministers of the 6 ministries should not know. For example, Beimang's infantry had paid a heavy price to break through 2 small cities outside Yuzhou Pass, the fall of Calabash Pass, and the appearance of Su Fengyan's Yuzhou cavalry. Even the great Snow Dragon cavalry had entered the battlefield. However, these secrets should be kept to the grave. Song Tonglu also knew an interesting thing, that he had to grit his teeth even more. The current emperor liked to collect jade dolls, which were sculpted from various materials. They were detailed and lifelike, ranging from 1 inch to 4 inches, with 3 different heights between each inch. There were a total of 9 grades. Because of Song Li's illustrious military exploits that everyone in the capital knew about, the 2 CUN tall jade statue Song Li stood on a table in a secluded study of the emperor. After Yuan Tingshan's military exploits, he jumped from 1.6 CUN to 3 CUN tall. There were relatively new jade figurines, such as Sun Yin, who had argued with the group of Confucians during the Imperial College's martial arts exhibition, Fan Zhongho, who had recently entered the capital, and Gao Tingshu, who was extremely eye-catching on the border of the Ministry of War. Yesterday, when Song Tonglu walked into the small study that only he, the head of the ceremony directorate, and 2 eunuchs on duty, entered, he found a brand new jade figurine. Even though there was no one in the room at the time, Song Tonglu, who was the head of the eunuchs, only dared to sneak a glance. He found that it was an extremely young stranger. Moreover, it was very different from the other jade figurines. This person had his eyes closed in concentration, like a blind man. Before Song Tonglu left the room, he had guessed the identity of this person. It was a blind chess player who, at his lowest, had no choice but to gamble in the shabby alleys of Qingzhou to make a living. It was a person who had no record in the Ministry of Appointments, Lu Su. There was no court meeting today. The Emperor Zhao Zhuan could practice his set of martial arts when the sky was slightly bright. Recently, the Empress had occasionally caught a cold and was not feeling well. The Emperor had specially sent her to her maternal home to recuperate and relax. During this time, the Emperor had not visited any woman. The common people often said that the Emperor was not anxious, but the eunuchs were anxious. However, most of them did not know the true meaning. In fact, it was referring to a time like this. For a small family, there was a saying that there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and having no descendants was the worst. For a vast and enormous dynasty, the ruler of a country without an heir was tantamount to an invisible disaster. The longer time passed, the clearer the countless bloody stories in the history books were. This was enough to trigger all sorts of unpredictable changes in the sky. However, no matter how carefully Song Tonglu and Diao Si tried to persuade him, the emperor, he still smiled and told Song Tonglu that he could occasionally do such things. When the empress was in the palace, he could occasionally do it. But now that the empress was in her maternal home, was sick, he would not do. Song Tonglu sincerely admired him. Moreover, the emperor practiced martial arts every day. How could it be a boring thing to do to pass the time? Song Tonglu believed that the world would not believe that the current emperor, from the moment he ascended the throne, had already begun to prepare to become the longest reigning ruler of Liang. The emperor of Liang, the emperor of Zhao, had sat on the dragon throne for 34 years. However, that person only ascended the throne at the age of 35. Song Tonglu believed that it would not be difficult for the current emperor to do it. After Zhao Zhuan finished practicing his martial arts, he began to walk in small circles. At this time, he would talk to himself. Song Tonglu bent his waist and quietly took 8 steps back, not 1 step more and not 1 step less. This small rule was set by the previous head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Han Shengxian. The rule was not big, but it was enough for Song Tonglu and his next head eunuch to scrupulously abide by it until death. Zhao Zhuan walked in circles and said softly, "For the time being, Sun Yin, who does not have an official position, is right. The vassal kings of various regions cannot hold the position of Jidushi. However, this change needs to be done slowly. First, in places where there are no vassal kings, we need to add deputy Jidushi. After a year and a half, we need to find 2 officials from the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Appointments who have authority and bring up this matter. Then, starting from my big brother, we will add deputy Jidushi and promote it. According to what Sun Yin said, it will not take too long to find a vassal king with a dirty background and have the imperial censor write a letter of impeachment to remove him from the position of Jidushi. Sun Yin's choice of candidate is not very appropriate. And, in my opinion, the king of Han is a good candidate. Sun Yin, at such a young age, is able to figure out the emperor's intentions. He is more like an old fox like Yin Maochun. If not for the fact that you were born in Beiliang and had no choice but to continue observing, I would have restored you to your official position today. I would have even reserved the position of scholar of Chong Wenguan for you." Zhao Zhuan, who was walking slowly, raised his hands and rubbed his temples. Since Lu Shangxiang has become a general with real power, he has to resign from his position as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War to make room for Gu Jiantong's right-hand man who has followed him for many years. Firstly, this will suppress the influence of the martial artists from Guangling and Jiangnan. In such a large Ministry of War, Minister Lu Baijie, Assistant Minister Lu Shengxiang, and Su Gong are all from that side. This is too outrageous. Furthermore, promoting Tang Taizuang, who is not lacking in military merit and reputation, will prevent Gu Jiantang from becoming the second. Zhao Zhuan snorted coldly and did not continue to say the name that he had heard since he was young. In reality, he did not have much ill will toward that old man. On the contrary, deep in his heart, he had a different impression of him from the previous emperor. It was just that he had hidden it very well these past few years. Otherwise, he would never be able to take half a step toward that chair in this lifetime. But that person's son, Zhao Zhuan, really felt stifled whenever he thought of him. At this moment, he began to truly understand the previous emperor. There were 2 people from the previous generation. One was the ruler and the other was the subject. One was surnamed Zhao and the other was surnamed Su. The 2 young people of this generation were cut from the same cloth. Zhao Zhuan pressed his fingers against his temples and stopped walking. His voice was extremely soft as he laughed. "The world is both envious and jealous of your surname, so they like to scold you. No matter what you do, it's all wrong. It seems like no one dares to scold me. Since you also feel that you can't cause your father to die in peace and are afraid that people will scold you and your father as slaves with 2 surnames, then I will let you die in peace." Zhao Zhuan suddenly frowned, as if he was asking himself, "If I were in your position, would I betray Liang and rely on Bei Meng?" Zhao Zhuan shook his head, not wanting to think about this meaningless question. He laughed loudly and could not stop himself from feeling pleased. "Unfortunately, your surname will always be Su, and my surname is Zhao. My sons and grandsons will continue to bear the imperial surname for generations to come. As for you, you will be buried in the history books together with Beiliang's 300,000 steel cavalry. After you die, I will definitely ask those civil officials in charge of history to give you a few pleasant conclusions." On the easternmost front line of Beimang, the king of Bando, Jingchong, who had just suffered a defeat in Jibei, brought only 200 of his personal cavalrymen and headed west in low spirits under the playful gazes of his colleagues. They were heading to Gusai province. Chapter 1409. His grandfather, who had lived to the age of 70 and was the clan master of the Yi clan in Southern Dynasty, had passed away. His great-grandfather, who was so old that he would be honored with the title of Yi clan in a few more years, was still alive. Although he no longer cared about the affairs of the clan and even ignored the officialdom of Southern Dynasty for many years, he was still alive. It seemed very awkward for a white-haired person to send off another white-haired person. However, the Wang clan, who had always been known as the fence-sitter in the western capital, was still prospering no matter how strong the wind blew. Wang Jingchong remembered that before the Melon Vine Rebellion in Southern Dynasty, Many old people of spring and autumn period had already started to prepare for their deaths. Wang Jingchong's great-grandfather was not the first old man who wanted to be buried in his hometown in the Central Plains. And he was not the first old man who wanted to be buried in Southern Dynasty to show his goodwill to Norland. His great-grandfather was always in a slow and steady manner when doing things. If one were to put it bluntly, he was following the trend and was a utilitarian. However, Wang Jingchong knew that if it weren't for his great-grandfather's slowness in many matters and his trustworthiness in times of crisis, the Wang family would have been wiped out by a random storm, let alone climbing all the way from a D-class noble family to a second-class noble family. Wang Jingchong had a feeling that the successor of the clan master was not someone else, but him. As for why he and the other Jubo suffered heavy losses in Jibei, it was not because Wang Jingchong and the other man were really careless and slack, it was also not because their subordinates were weak, and it was also not because Yuan Tingshan's choice of timing and location was too wonderful, as Liang dynasty thought. The truth was that the imperial decree of peace had sent a message to both of them. In the Battle of Jibei they could only lose, not win, and they could only suffer a small loss. While Wang Jingchong was riding his horse, he smiled. Whether it was Yuan Tingshan or Gu Jiantang, just you wait, Liang dynasty. In the old palace of Dechu, he was no longer the man in a green robe who had been waiting for the imperial decree for many years. He walked alone into the courtyard that had been abandoned for many years. In the past, this place was filled with national chess players, and he was the most proud of it. He searched for a long time, but he could not find the 2 chess jars that he used to place on the chessboard countless times. Before he walked out of the courtyard, he could only settle for the next best thing. He took the other 2 old chess boxes that he was familiar with. He said softly, "The next time I appear outside Tian City, I will tell the world that Dechu was not a femme fatale back then." On this day, Chao Chongqing's Confucian Saint realm changed from the way of the king to the way of the overlord. In the eyes of outsiders, Nanjiang was a barren land with raging miasma. Since the founding of the Great Qin dynasty, it had always been regarded as a dangerous path to be an official. The emperor liked to demote those officials who were disobedient but could not be killed here. Zhao Bing, who was lucky enough to come here to be the king of Yanqi instead of the king of Huainan, had guarded the border conscientiously for so many years. He had strictly abided by the rules of the suzerain vassal state and never complained. Even his eldest son, His Royal Highness, and other sons had never spread any absurd acts in the north. This was enough to win sympathy. In addition, Zhao Bing had always been kind to the officials in his jurisdiction. Many civil officials who came here with the heart of death but returned to the north alive all admired Zhao Bing greatly. Occasionally, there were scholars in Jiangnan who made jokes about Zhao Bing and Nalin Yuxi's homosexuality, but Zhao Bing did not show any anger or shame. If it were not for the disappointment of His Royal Highness Zhao Zhu, who had a good reputation, perhaps more people would be close to Nanjiang. After all, they had high expectations for Zhao Zhu. After all, this young man who joined the army liked to go to the barbarian tribes to kill people. Compared with the heroic death of the king of Huainan Zhao Ying, it paled in comparison. Not to mention, there was also the rescue of the king of Jing and Zhao Sun from thousands of miles away, which almost wiped out the whole army. Nalin Yusi had always been an existence that made people see flowers in the fog. Some people described him as a character that should only appear in novels. It was rumored that he was more beautiful than a married woman. He used his beauty and military strategy to enchant the king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing. That was why he was willing to stay in Nanjiang for 20 years. There were also people who said with certainty that Mr. Nalin, the most luxurious person in Nanjiang, had 5 personal maidservants who could be said to be devastatingly beautiful. They were called Fengdu, Dongyue, Shishu, 3 Corpses, and Cheng Lu. There was no snow in Nanjiang in winter. As for the spring cold that could make famous people in Jiangnan feel cold to the bones, it was never chilly here. On the top floor of a 13-story lofty bookstore, a handsome middle-aged scholar in thin clothes was letting a group of orioles and swallows help him move books to dry them. He sat peacefully on a small red sandalwood couch, leisurely holding a book and reading. He sat up and put the yellowed book in his hand on his knee. He smiled and asked a young beauty with a plump figure who was closest to him, "I know that there are not many women in the world who are as beautiful as you, but it is easy for me to find a few more. But in the end, there are only 5 of you? The woman nicknamed Chang Lu turned her head. Her eyes narrowed into 2 crescent moons as she smiled. Mr. Nayland is so knowledgeable. How could I guess Mr. Nayland's thoughts? The scholar joked. With your flattery skills, when you entered the palace, you were at most a small concubine. The maid's smile became softer, and her eyes were infatuated. She was charming and natural. But I really didn't mean to say good things for you. The man smiled warmly, blinked, and said mischievously, I know, you 5 don't work. Go downstairs and play. Let me, the knowledgeable Mr. Nayland, study alone. The 5 people didn't hesitate at all and went downstairs with light steps. This scholar, who could be called a vassal king more than Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi, could only be Nayland Yusi. He looked down at the book that his old friend gave him. It was just an ordinary Confucian classic. It was not like the exquisite engraved book, which was more valuable as it aged. This book was more than 20 years old. No one would be willing to accept it even if he gave it away. In terms of extravagance, Mr. Nayland, who was the best in Nanjiang, carefully kept it for more than 20 years. In addition to drying the book himself, he only took it out of the sandalwood box 2 or 3 days a year to read it. Zhao Bing once asked in private, Xiaoyan, could it be that what he gave was not as good as an old book? Nayland Yusi just shook his head. Fortunately, Zhao Bing never cared about this kind of detail. Nayland Yusi looked at his old friend's belongings that had no grave after his death and chuckled softly. You are so poor that you don't even have a coin purse. You are so pitiful that you don't even have a coin purse. You and I traveled together to study in different countries. When we parted, you, who only had 2 books, gave me this book. How can the king of Yanqi compare with you? Is he really willing to give me half of his property? Nayland Yusi raised his head, narrowed his eyes, and looked at the sky. Fengdu, Dongyue, Shishu, 3 corpses riding shoes, 10 crosses. This is all of our hard work. Over the years, there have been 3 confirmed dead people. There are 2 missing people. There are 5 left, 1 more than you and I expected. It's enough. For these last 5 people, Zhao Bing killed tens of thousands of people in Nanjiang. Not to mention the refugees in Beiliang, nearly 10,000 people in the border army died. Nayland Yusi stretched out his hand to touch his forehead. His expression was extremely contradictory, as though he was sad and satisfied at the same time. He smiled softly and said, You said that since there were wanderers, after hundreds of years of evolution, the wanderers no longer wandered and turned into aristocratic families. Country, 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 the word country in front and the word family in front. You were just a poor scholar at that time. You told me that you wanted to try and let the scholars in the world put the country before the family again. For this reason, you set up this trap. In the end, except for those 5 people, only I know about it in the world. The tall building towered into the clouds, and wind came from all directions. A gust of wind blew, and Nayland Yusi's hair was dazzled. The book on his knee made a slight rustling sound. Nayland Yusi closed his eyes and listened carefully to the sound of the pages turning. The corner of his mouth curled up. You once asked me seriously, one day, when you suddenly die, how will you fight against life and death? I once answered, life and death is a small matter, but a close friend is a big matter. Where my heart is at peace, there is a pure land and a lotus pond. The spring breeze turned the pages of the book. It was just like the dead person turning the pages of the book. Chapter 14:10. The earth paste was thick, and when spring thunderstruck, all things would happen. It was drizzling, and it was close to dusk. On the official road connecting Yanji Prefecture and Bishan County, 3 horses galloped. They finally made it to Will Street before dinner time. The 3 horses slowly traveled on the slightly muddy street and finally arrived at a secluded courtyard after a few turns. The 3 dismounted. Lu Yunzhang, who had the large frost saber on his back, had a suspicious look on his face. He didn't know why Yu Dilong wanted to come to this godforsaken place. When his master said that they would return to Liangzhou, this guy's face fell. He went back to his room and delayed for a long time. Through the door, he said that he had eaten something bad and asked Lu Yunzhang to accompany his master. Lu Yunzhang was immediately amused. With Yu Dilong's internal strength, even if he swallowed swords and knives, he wouldn't get sick. Lu Yunzhang teased him. Could it be that you're pregnant? In the past, his eldest senior brother, who couldn't take a joke, would have used his fists to compare notes with him. This time, however, there was no reaction. Then, for some reason, his master said that they would go to Bishan County first. Yu Dilong immediately became lively and ran to the stables. He then took the horse and mounted it in one go. The Shitakian door was made of reed stalks. If Lu Yunzhang casually pushed it, it would open. However, after Yu Dilong tied the horse with familiarity, he solemnly straightened his clothes at the door and patted the rain stains on his shoulder. Only then did he seriously knock on the door. Soon, Lu Yunzhang saw the door slowly open. A woman in plain clothes walked out. Lu Yunzhang whispered, "Yu Dilong, is that your mother?" Yu Dilong was annoyed and subconsciously blurted out, "It's your mother." He probably felt that if Auntie Pei became Lu Yunzhang's mother, then Lu Yunzhang's ancestors would be too proud. How was this scolding? It was clearly praising him. Yu Dilong quickly pulled a long face and said, "Don't be so cheeky. Call her Auntie Pei with me later. I don't care about other times, but if you don't behave properly today, I will really beat you up." Lu Yunzhang rolled his eyes, but he soon couldn't shift his eyes away. Goodness gracious! This big sister was truly beautiful. However, Lu Yunzhang quickly lowered his gaze. He wasn't a simple-minded fool. He had been at the bottom of the martial emperor city in the East Sea for so many years. Even though he was young, he was experienced. Even if he used his butt to guess, he would know that this absolute beauty was their master's something. Following that, the elder sister's words and actions made Lu Yunzhang look at her in a different light. Who was his master? Putting aside the fact that he was the most powerful vassal king in the Liang dynasty, he had obtained the title of the world's No. 1 expert after spending a few years in the martial world. Lu Yunzhang even heard that the purple-clothed Shenyuan, the only female martial world alliance chief in the past few hundred years, was only his master's follower. However, this woman behind the tattered wooden door wasn't in a hurry to remove the door bolt. She had a cold expression and glanced at Su Fengyan with a faint smile. It was better not to smile. Even Lu Yunzhang felt a mysterious killing intent when he looked at her. She then said, "Yo, what a rare guest." Lu Yunzhang, who was in admiration, almost couldn't help but give her a thumbs up. He was thinking that this was definitely a heroine. Furthermore, she was a true heroine who didn't care about worldly affairs, but had top-notch martial arts. Otherwise, who in the world would have the strength and courage to give his master the cold shoulder? Yu Dilong held back his laughter, seemingly happy to see his master suffer. Su Fengyan coughed and waited for a moment. Seeing that she had no intention of opening the door, he said awkwardly, "I was a little busy. By the way, have you eaten?" Pei Nanwei ignored him. At this moment, Yu Dilong stretched his neck and smiled brightly. "Aunt Pei." Pei Nanwei smiled knowingly and opened the door for the three of them. She rubbed Yu Dilong's head. "You seem to have grown taller." Yu Dilong chuckled. The four of them walked into the house together. Lu Yunzhang looked around furtively but couldn't see anything special. It was just a very ordinary Bailiang family's house. There was a faint green vegetable garden in the corner and even a simple chicken coop. Yu Dilong kicked Lu Yunzhang. Lu Yunzhang whispered, "What are you doing?" Yu Dilong glared at him. Lu Yunzhang was stunned for a moment before he quickly squeezed out a smile. "Aunt Pei, my name is Lu Yunzhang, a master's eldest disciple." After returning from the gourd, Yu Dilong, who had been carrying the cold saber on his back, expressionlessly raised his hand to grab the hilt. Lu Yunzhang, who didn't dare to risk his life with Yu Dilong, hurriedly said with a smile, Sorry, a master's last disciple. Yu Dilong is my eldest senior brother. Master has another disciple called Wang Sheng. She's my second senior sister." Pei Nanwei smiled and nodded. After entering the house, Pei Nanwei went to the kitchen to make some vegetables for the three of them. The four of them sat around the table with a stool each. Su Fengyan slowly picked up his chopsticks. Pei Nanwei asked, "When are we leaving?" Su Fengyan smiled bitterly. You're chasing me away just like that? Pei Nanwei was silent for a moment. She suddenly frowned and said, Aren't you still the registrar of Bishan County? How come you don't receive your salary? I went to the county office after the Lantern Festival. The household secretary said that you don't need to go to the office for roll call anymore. Later, I heard that the county magistrate and the county governor communicated and wanted to replace the registrar with a scholar from outside the county. Su Fengyan smiled. It's not right to occupy the latrine but not take a shit. My salary is... Realizing that Pei Nanwei was staring at him, Su Fengyan slapped his chopsticks and immediately changed his tune. He pretended to be angry and said, Preposterous! Isn't this bullying? I'll find a chance to go to the county office to reason things out. Pei Nanwei said, We'll go after dinner. Su Fengyan carefully asked, There's no extra money at home? Pei Nanwei said indifferently, In order to live, who would complain about having more money? Yu Dilong, who was born a poor child, had a deep expression on his face. He nodded and said, That's right. And Pei, you're right. In a moment, Master and I will go to the Bishan County office to ask for your salary. If you don't give it to us... Pei Nanwei smiled and said, Speak properly. Don't fight. Yu Dilong nodded vigorously. He looked at Su Fengyan and said solemnly, Master, in Bailiang, don't we get rewarded for military service? The money outside the gourd belongs to the big guys and doesn't count as mine. Why don't you give me 10 taels of silver in advance and I'll make up for it later on the battlefield? I'll leave the money with Aunt Pei first. Su Fengyan kicked his stupid disciple under the table. He smiled helplessly and said, I don't have any money on me. Yu Dilong didn't give up and said, Didn't we take 2 jars of chess pieces from the county capital? There's also a pawn shop on Lualu Street. I think they're quite valuable. Why don't you give me 40 or 50 pieces and I'll pawn them for 10 taels of silver first? Su Fengyan touched his forehead and sighed softly. This little prodigal son, the 2 jujube wooden jars with 180 pieces each. Whether it was the frozen fish brain black chess piece or the snow white chess piece, in terms of material, not to mention 10 taels of silver, they wouldn't even be sold for 10 taels of gold. Moreover, this kind of antique was the same as collecting rare editions of books. It was very particular about whether one liked it or not. Moreover, this was the first imperial tribute of West Chu's palace. God knows if it was the favorite of some chess piece in the past. It was even possible that State Preceptor Li Mibi or Chao Chongqing had used it to play chess with others. Pei Nanwei asked unhappily, How old is he? How can he go to the battlefield to kill people? Su Fengyan looked at her and said calmly, He's my disciple. Yu Dilong was probably afraid that his master and Aunt Pei would quarrel because of him. He smiled and said, Aunt Pei, it's fine. I'm from Bailiang. Since I know martial arts, it's only right for me to go to the battlefield and kill the barbarians. In the future, after I've paid off the big guy's debt and made contributions to the military, I'll send the money to you. Can you help me save it? When the time comes, Aunt Pei can use it as you please. Pei Nanwei smiled and said, Later, Aunt Pei will find someone to renovate the house and build a courtyard house. When the time comes, I'll specially reserve a room for you. While wolfing down his food, Yu Dilong raised his head and said excitedly, Okay. After Su Fengyan finished eating, he put down his chopsticks and looked at Pei Nanwei. I'll go with you to the county office and let the 2 children wash the dishes. After the 2 of them each took an oil paper umbrella and walked out of the house, Lu Yunzhang sat cross-legged on a stool and looked at Yu Dilong, who was busy cleaning up the dishes. He whispered, Who exactly is Aunt Pei? Why does it seem like our master is quite concerned about her? Yu Dilong, who was in a good mood, had the thought of joking. He deliberately said mysteriously, Aunt Pei is amazing. There's no second in the world in martial arts, but there's a third in the world. Lu Yunzhang had a look of disbelief. Are you lying to me? Yu Dilong curled his lips and said, It's up to you to believe it or not. In any case, Aunt Pei can crush you with 1 finger. By the way, this is my house. When you visit in the future, remember not to freeload. You have to bring a gift. Lu Yunzhang grimaced. Yu Dilong happily ran to the kitchen with the bowls and chopsticks. I have a home. Su Fengyan and Pei Nanwei walked in the alley and sighed. Thank you. Pei Nanwei said indifferently, because of that child, you Dilong? There's no need. I like this child to begin with. As for that Lu Yunzhong, he exudes a vicious aura. I don't like him. Su Fengyan shook his head and said, You're wrong. If I were to ignore him, Lu Yunzhong would only be a formidable person in the pugilistic world at best. He would only be a martial arts alliance leader. However, if Yu Dilong isn't restrained, or if he doesn't have anything to worry about, he will be very terrifying. This child might have a chance of becoming the next Wang Xianji. Chapter 14:11. Su Fengyan felt a headache coming on. It's hard to say what the world will look like in the future, but after Huang Sanja transferred the fate of the 8 countries to Jianghu, the current Jianghu is like a bamboo forest. It's a year of spring, but soon, the bamboo will bloom. Once it dies, a large area will die. Everything within a radius of dozens or even hundreds of miles will die. Moreover, there won't be any bumper harvests in the future. It'll all be a small year. The more it's like this, the more outstanding my 3 disciples, Yu Dilong, Wang Shang, and Lu Yunzhong, will be. Especially Yu Dilong, who has the best opportunities and the highest achievements. When the time comes, he'll definitely stand alone. Perhaps he'll be the only immortal on Earth in the 100 years after my generation. Therefore, whether he has a family or not will make a big difference. Pei Nanwei smiled. That's why you're willing to come here and have a meal. It's really hard for you, the king of Beiliang, to worry about the country, its people, and the world while fighting against the Beimang barbarians. Moreover, you're even scheming against your own disciple. Aren't you tired? Su Fengyan said self-deprecatingly. It's fine to worry about the country and its people. I really don't have that kind of free time. In the end, I just want to protect the family business that Su Xiao passed to me. This is my bottom line. It's even better if I can do something good above my bottom line. If I can't do it, I won't force myself. However, I really don't want to add fuel to the fire or kick someone when they're down. As for the scheming you mentioned, perhaps, there's no other way. When I see you Dilong, it's hard not to think of that Wang Xianji. He, Huang Longsher, and Zhang Julu are 3 people I hated in my early years, but in the end, I can't help but admire. Pei Nanwei suddenly said, I just heard the military news from the mouth of the gourd. It said that Crouching Bao City and Luanhe City were conquered by the Beimang barbarians. I thought you'd send a spy to tell me to move back to Mount Qingliang. These 2 days, people in Bishan City have been saying that you personally led troops to the mouth of the gourd and killed many barbarians. Does that mean I don't have to go to Liangzhou anymore? Su Fengyan smiled and said, If you don't like it, you don't have to go back. Also, to tell you the truth, if the Beimang army really goes south, Yuzhou will be the last of the 4 provinces in Beiliang. Pei Nanwei asked in confusion, Later than Liangzhou? Su Fengyan nodded and said, The geographical situation dictates it. For example, Yuzhou is of little value and extremely difficult to conquer. Liuzhou was just an appetizer. Tasted spicy, but Beimang could finish it if he gritted his teeth. Lingzhou was a plate of delicacies, but it was a little far away, and the barbarians couldn't reach it with their chopsticks. Therefore, the main battlefield can only be in Liangzhou. The cities will attack and defend, and the light cavalry of both sides will wait for an opportunity to move. Even the first large-scale battle between heavy cavalry in history can happen. Pei Nanwei said softly, Beiliang Road is still too small, and there aren't enough people. Su Fengyan was a little helpless. What do you think? Back then, when Liang was controlling the various vassal towns, he had a lot of reference to Sun Ping's Quadiji and Xie Guaniying's Hongjianian county map. The territories of the various vassal kings, how many soldiers Su Zhao's Beiliang Road could support, and how many soldiers Zhao Bing's Nanjiang could support, were all calculated and deduced countless times. Since the middle of Yonghui's reign, all kinds of restrictions and support for Beiliang Road were built on the foundation of Beimang using Beiliang as the entry point to the south. Yuan Benshi was betting on the current situation. As for Zhao Bing's Nanjiang, it was used to target West Chu's re-establishment of Guangling Road. Otherwise, How could Li Yang still be so calm and composed after Yang Xinqing and Yan Jinchuan's defeat? Zhao Dun even had the leisure to take Gu Jiantang to Jizhou to see the scenery before his death, instead of going to the southern part of the capital to boost the army's morale. He also didn't rush the two Liao border armies to the south. The reason was very simple. In Zhao Dun's eyes, the re-establishment of West Chu wasn't a big deal that would harm the country's vitality. What he wanted to do was to control the situation and weaken the separatist forces of all the vassal kings outside Bailiang Road. He wasn't afraid of losing many battles in the early stages. On the contrary, he was afraid of Yang Xinqing. Yan Jinchuan won consecutive battles at the beginning, causing the Duke of Guangling, Zhao Yi, the Duke of Huainan, and the King of Jing and Zhao Sun to have nothing to do with them. Otherwise, why do you think Yan Jinchuan, who was familiar with military affairs, would rush south to help Yang Xinqing? How could Lu Shengxiang not see the risks? After the war, why didn't anyone from the Ministry of War in the capital, including Lu Shengxiang, get punished? Pei Nanwei said worriedly. What if Zhao Bing, the Duke of Yanqi, doesn't send troops? Beimang's million-strong army is pressuring the border. Is the imperial court really not afraid of being attacked from the front and rear? When the time comes, can Gu Jiantang's Tu Liao defend Taiyan City alone? Su Fengyan smiled and said softly, "You're underestimating Zhao Dun and those famous ministers of Spring of Eternal Hui. Vassal towns, eunuchs, relatives, civil officials, and local military generals have always been the 5 great evils of history. You might as well recall the situation of the Liang imperial court in the past 20 years, and the result of West Chu's reestablishment." Pei Nanwei said tirelessly, "Eunuchs meddling in politics didn't exist when the 2 Zhao emperors were alive, and there won't be any in the future. It's the same with the matter of relatives. If we're talking about party struggles, during the reign of Eternal Hui, there was Zhang Julu who didn't amount to much. Now that Zhang Lu and Gu Lu have collapsed, although I don't know what will happen if someone else sits on the dragon throne, I know that before Zhao Dun died, he invited the Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy, Qi Yanglong, to Taiyan City to be the appointed minister, to help the new emperor stabilize the court. As for the local military generals, after the collapse of Gu Lu, and with the example of Yang Xinqing and Yan Jinchuan, the 2 old generals, everyone felt insecure. In addition, Gu Jiantang made concessions everywhere. Many military generals were thankful to be able to protect themselves. They really didn't have the heart to challenge the imperial court. Among the old vassal kings, the Duke of Huainan, Zhao Ying, died. The Duke of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, was suppressed by Gu Jiantang to the point that he had difficulty breathing. As for Qingzhou, in order to show his loyalty, that person seems to have sacrificed thousands of elite cavalry, right? Then, Bailiang will fight to the death with Beimang. The most powerful Duke of Guangling, Zhao Yi, is restrained by West Chu, and it's inevitable that he will be injured. In addition, you said that the Duke of Yan, Zhao Bing, will soon be ordered to go north. Pei Nanwei reached out to stroke the hair on her forehead and smiled, as expected of the Spring of Eternal Hui. Su Fengyan sighed. Qi Yanglong didn't disappoint. The new imperial court did a lot of things well. They made an exception for the meritorious generals and added 6 academicians to the civil officials. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Su Fengyan lowered his head slightly and looked at the rainwater falling on the limestone floor in the alley and then disappearing. Zhang Julu is dead. Other than some hidden things, there won't be any changes. However, many of the marks that he and Zhang Julu left in the Liang dynasty will soon fade and then disappear without a trace. The Spring of Eternal Hui, written by Zhang Julu, is a book that can be flipped over at will. This is the most powerful part of the Liang dynasty. It looks like wind is blowing in all directions, but it's actually as stable as Mount Tai. In the end, it's because Zhao Dun left behind a lot of assets for the current emperor. The 2 walked slowly. There was still some distance before they reached the Yamen of Bishan district. Pei Nanwei wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fengyan turned to look at her and smiled. "If you want to ask, then ask." Pei Nanwei looked at him. "Don't you know what I want to ask?" Su Fengyan closed his oil paper umbrella and suddenly squeezed under her umbrella. Pei Nanwei didn't show any strange expression. She thought that if the husband and wife went to the Yamen to quarrel and ask for money, it might be inappropriate for them to hold their own umbrellas. Their momentum would be weaker. Su Fengyan took the umbrella from her hand and walked side by side on the wheeled street after turning out of the alley. When I was on the way to the Xingwu city with Wudong Wang Xiaoping, I wasn't sure if I could survive under the hands of Catman Han Shengxian. So I told Wang Xiaoping some things from my heart. My father, Su Xiao, has never been a narrow-minded person. He said that Beiliang Road and Liang Road are one family. It's okay to quarrel behind closed doors. If we can't live under the same roof, then we can move out and set up our own house next door. We won't interact with each other for the rest of our lives. But if others feel that they can take advantage of this opportunity and come to his house to show off, then Su Xiao doesn't mind slapping them in the face. It's that simple. Of course, Su Xiao also has a bottom line, which is me, his son, who is going to inherit his family business. As long as I don't die, even if the process of inheriting the family business is bumpy and not smooth, Su Xiao can endure it. If I die in the hands of the imperial court, then he won't care about Beiliang anymore. He will definitely lead the 300,000 Beiliang frontier army and fight all the way to Tai and city. In the past, when I traveled Jianghu with Old Huang, the empress at that time, now Empress Dowager Zhaoji, personally mobilized the imperial bodyguards to help me block a disaster. Obviously, as a woman, she can rely on her intuition to grasp Su Xiao's thoughts. Su Fengyan suddenly laughed to himself and said, "As for me, in the past, when I was in the capital, I boasted that I would guard the country for the people of the Central Plains. It wasn't true, but it wasn't a lie either. In any case, I have to help Su Xiao guard Beiliang. Isn't that the same as guarding the northwest door for the people of the Central Plains? It's the same thing, but we have different intentions." The corners of Pei Nanwei's mouth gently curved up. Su Fengyan looked at the yamen not far ahead and said softly, "That old woman in Beimang once said in front of everyone from the two dynasties that she is willing to rule the world together with Su Xiao. Doesn't it sound very heroic?" Pei Nanwei nodded and said, "Yes." Su Fengyan laughed and said, "This is a needle hidden in the silk floss. In the past, Su Xiao refused to rule by drawing rivers, and a group of generals who were unwilling to accept this left. If you say that this was Su Xiao's own doing. Later on, the imperial court allowed the Su family to ride their armored horses into Jianghu and use their blades against the people of the Wulin. How many low-level soldiers left? You definitely wouldn't be able to guess that it was more than 20,000. Not one of them wasn't an elite veteran who had experienced hundreds of battles. If Su Xiao was willing to accept the old woman in Beimang's suggestion, how many people do you think would have left? Su Fengyan stretched out a hand and twirled it. At least 100,000. Pei Nanwei suddenly understood and said, "So that's how it is." Chapter 14:12. Su Fengyan narrowed his eyes. During that snowstorm, Su Xiao met with that old woman outside the pass. Tuoba Bodhisattva and I each acted as coachmen. In the end, we parted on bad terms. However, if you think that Su Xiao didn't agree because he felt that Beiliang's army's morale would drop, then you're underestimating my father and Empress Morong too much. She privately promised Su Xiao and proposed a condition. You won't be able to guess it even if you beat me to death. Pei Nanwei casually said, "Isn't it that after we succeed, Su Xiao will be old and can only retire, but Su Fengyan can be the master of the Central Plains?" Su Fengyan was stunned. He couldn't help but curse. His face was full of shock as he said, "You can guess that?" Pei Nanwei rolled her eyes at him. "I couldn't guess it at first, but since you said it like that, I just can't believe it. Besides, Zhao Ji is a woman and so am I. Can't I guess Empress Morong's thoughts?" Su Fengyan praised from the bottom of his heart. "Amazing!" Pei Nanwei suddenly said, "I'm not cold." Su Fengyan looked confused. Pei Nanwei twitched the corner of her mouth. "You're really afraid that I'll be cold and get splashed by the rain on my shoulder. Why don't you just turn the umbrella sideways to me? Aren't you being too sincere? Take your hand away." Su Fengyan resentfully withdrew his hand from Pei Nanwei's shoulder. The two of them walked through the county yaman's gate. Su Fengyan closed the umbrella. County Magistrate Feng Guan and County Prime Minister Zhu Jing both lived behind the yamen. Su Fengyan, who was nominally the third in command of the county yamen, should also have a place. However, Feng Guan bullied him because he was young ignorant, and had no foundation, and pushed him out. When they entered the mountain to suppress the bandits, they actually didn't do anything. It was only because Fengguan, who was the first in command, got an above-average grade in the year-end evaluation. Zhu Jing shared the leftovers. County Magistrate Bai Shank, who was a scholar going to Liang, successfully transferred to the Yuzhou army. As the two of them passed through the Yamen, the Su officials of the 6th branch who were still on duty greeted them warmly. They had a good impression of Su Qi, the young registrar who had been missing for a long time and was unable to keep his seat. However, within their warm expressions, there was also a hint of playfulness in their eyes, both pity and schadenfreude. Su Fengyan relied on these clues to know what was going on. Although Registrar Su was about to pack up and leave, Fengguan was not too unreasonable when he learned that this person had come to visit. After all, he was the main culprit. Otherwise, Su Qi would not have to leave Bishan County so quickly. In Yozhou's old calendar, not to mention a year and a half, how many disciples of the general class who worked in the Yamen to make money could not be seen for years? Who told Su Qi, a disciple of a low-class general class, to not have a backer and to not understand the current situation and loiter around? Who in Yuzhou dared to not take the roll call seriously? It was said that in Lingzhou, under the reorganization of the provincial governor of the granary, a large number of disciples of noble families who didn't do proper work were taught a lesson. Fengguan sat in the study and was playing with two new good items, the bamboo-carved Shaosher Taisher paperweight and the bamboo yellow Lingji jade Rui Rui that was said to be made by the imperial family of the old southern Tang. After hearing the servant's report, he originally wanted to get up and go outside the study to deal with the matter. He was not going to let Su Qi drink a sip of hot tea. However, when the servant considerately mentioned that Registrar Su's wife was also coming along, the county magistrate understood. He put his butt back on the chair and said that he would meet the guest in the study and prepare tea. Fengguan did not walk to the door of the study to welcome him. Then, the county magistrate saw the young man, who was supposed to be full of flattery, directly cross the threshold. He also did not take the initiative to greet him. What he did next was even more absurd. He actually had his wife, who was supposed to be a living widow, sit on the chair while he leaned against the chair. He asked, "If I remember correctly, the new registrar and county magistrate are both scholars from Beiliang. They are called Yang Gongshou and Zhu Ying, respectively. Previously, they were both students of Green Deer Cave Academy. Now, there is the great Confucian scholar Huang Chong and others in charge of reviewing the essays of Beiliang scholars. That Yang Gongshou was the champion of a half-year review in Yuzhou. Let's not talk about him. How about Zhu Ying?" Fengguan was still holding the exquisite bamboo carving in one hand and his other hand was still in the posture of inviting someone to drink tea. He was at a loss. For a moment, he didn't dare to look directly at the young man in front of him. Fengguan felt that it was strange. Where did this kid get this authority from? Fengguan did not even feel this kind of pressure from the governor of Yanji County, Hong Shandong. Fengguan, who felt that he had lost all face, put down the bamboo Rui ornament and drank a mouthful of tea to moisten his throat. Using the official voice that he had cultivated for many years, he said, "Su Qi." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "My name is Su Fengyan." Fengguan was stunned for a moment. He sneered and said, "I am Zhang Julu." Fengguan suddenly realized that the Grand Secretary was already dead. He flew into a rage out of humiliation. He slapped the table and said, "Su Qi, do you believe that I can arrest you and throw you into prison just because of your shameful words?" Pei Nanwei reached out 2 fingers and secretly pinched Su Fengyan's waist. She also imitated the county magistrate's tone. "Let's talk business." Su Fengyan snapped his fingers. Then, Fengguan discovered that a gust of cold wind had appeared beside him. A black-clothed brawny man with a rigid expression was standing there. He took out a simple bronze general's talisman from his bosom and held it in front of Fengguan's eyes. Fengguan had heard that the high-ranking officers of the border army all had a general's talisman. It did not need to be used to mobilize troops. It only had one use, and that was on the battlefield. If the general died in battle, it would be handed over to the deputy general to command. If the deputy general died in battle, it would be handed over to the lieutenant general. If the lieutenant general died in battle, it would be handed over to the lieutenant general. However, Feng Guan was not sure if this was the general's talisman. Besides, even if he was beaten to death, he did not believe that Su Qi was some king of Bailiang. As a result, Feng Guan suddenly felt a surge of heroic spirit. He loudly reprimanded, "Su Qi, you are impudent. Do you really think this official is easy to fool?" The earthly branch death warrior who had followed Su Shao for many years glanced at his new master. Su Fengyan waved his hand, and this expressionless figure disappeared in a flash. Feng Guan felt his hair stand on end. Su Fengyan did not know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out to grab two of Pei Nanwei's fingers, and the latter struggled to pull them away. Su Fengyan said helplessly, "Let's not talk about other things first. Give me your salary for the next few months. I'm waiting to be cooked at home." Feng Guan leaned back in his chair. "If you have something to say, we can talk it out. Killing people to silence them is not something I can do. There are hundreds of brocade cavalry under my rule in Bishan district." Rather than believing that this former secretary was some Su Fengyan, he was more inclined to believe that this fellow was a Beimang spy who had infiltrated Yuzhou. Pei Nanwei stretched out a hand and said calmly, "Pay up, 24 taels and 7 coins. Feng Guan's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He forced a smile and said, "These 2 bamboo carvings were made by famous craftsmen in the spring and autumn period. They can be sold for at least 100 taels of silver. You can take them." Pei Nanwei sneered, "Use them to light a fire? Enough. Besides, it's too dirty to use your hands. I want the silver. HM. Feng Guan cursed angrily in his heart. He had only played with these 2 bamboo carvings. How was it dirty? Then did she not use the real money? She was really a woman with long hair and short knowledge. She was born with such a femme fatale appearance in vain. Su Fengyan smiled and said, "County magistrate, then I'll go to the household to get my salary." Feng Guan's legs were actually trembling, but he still pretended to be calm and waved his hand. He thought that as soon as the couple left, he would immediately have the torture room and the bailiffs arrest them. After Su Fengyan walked out of the study, he picked up the 2 oil paper umbrellas at the door. Pei Nanwei asked, "You're going to ask for your salary like this?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "I'm just afraid that I won't be able to reason with him. Besides, with his eyes wandering around your body, I'm afraid that before I can say anything, I won't be able to resist slapping him to death." Slapping Feng Guan to death is actually not bad. Anyone can be this kind of official. It's just right to make room for Yang Gongshou and Zhu Ying. Pei Nanwei's expression was a bit strange. Su Fengyan received his salary from the Yamen office in the front yard. Naturally, Su Li didn't dare to show any attitude to the secretary who had the county magistrate's imperial edict. When they walked out of the Yamen, they found that the rain had stopped. Su Fengyan softly said, "That Yang Gongshou is nothing. He only knows how to write some beautiful essays that are not supported by any spiritual energy." Zhu Ying, on the other hand, is not famous in the academy at the foot of the Green Deer Mountain, but she has a lot of critical essays on current affairs, all of which are placed on Fu Shui's desk. In the end, even my heir Jie was alarmed. She specially wrote a letter to me saying that this person is very useful. It's just that compared to Chen Shiliang and Su Beiji, she is too sharp, stubborn, and unforgiving. Several times, she even forced Huang Chang to invite a great scholar to give a lecture. Pei Nanwei said with a cold face, "That Yang Gongshou is not a good person." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "I knew it. Is this person pestering you? Fu Shui's spy hasn't told me about this. Is it something that happened recently?" Chapter 14:13. There was no anger on Pei Nanwei's face. "Last time when I went to the Yamen to collect my debt, this person came to Bishan County to take up his post. He's probably waiting for the prefectural governor's official approval and has nothing better to do. Every time I go out to buy something, he'll appear. At least he still has the face of a scholar. He won't come near me and will just recite poems from a distance. His level might be on par with yours in the past." Su Fengyan couldn't help but laugh. "How is that possible? When I bought poems from Bailiang scholars, They were all expensive and the content was good. Pei Nanwei and Su Fengnian were about to turn into an alley when 4 or 5 ruffians, who seemed to be waiting for them, surrounded them with smiles on their faces. Pei Nanwei glanced at Su Fengnian. The latter frowned and muttered to himself, "Hasn't Bishan County experienced the power of the brocade cavalry? How can someone have the guts to cause trouble at a time like this?" Very quickly, the answer came to light. In the time it took for the ruffians to surround them, a hero came to save the damsel in distress. Not far behind Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei, a man in white clothes and carrying a sword appeared. He was very handsome and elegant, and his posture was very elegant. He also had a sword at his side, which seemed to be worth a lot. When he saw Su Fengnian beside Pei Nanwei, a trace of sadness and disappointment flashed across his eyes. But very quickly, this emotion turned into passion and endless fighting spirit. He didn't even need to use his sword. His sword moved like a swimming dragon. With a light shout, he stepped forward quickly and sent out a palm strike from 7 or 8 steps away. Immediately, one of the ruffians seemed to be swept away by the powerful palm strike. His feet left the ground and he crashed into the wall of the alley. The white-clothed swordsman sent out another palm strike. Another ruffian's body spun several times before he fell to the ground, moaning in pain. The corner of Pei Nanwei's mouth twitched. She turned her head away, refusing to look at this idiot. Su Fengnian stretched out his fingers to pinch her chin and gently turned her head back. He held back his laughter and said, "You are a hero who draws his sword to help when he sees injustice on the road. It's also very hard for you. Okay? You should at least finish watching the show." The white-clothed swordsman was busy showing off his dense inner strength and peerless martial arts, so he did not see this scene. Otherwise, he would have probably spat out blood. One palm after another, he beat the group of ruffians until they were scared witless. Some even struggled to get up and rush toward the white-clothed swordsman. But before they could even touch the corner of the swordsman's clothes, they were swept away by the swift and fierce wind from his palms. They flew sideways, backward, and spun away in all kinds of wonderful poses. Su Fengnian turned his head and explained to Pei Nanwei in a low voice, "When I did this kind of thing in the past, I spent more than 200 taels, because at the beginning, I had the imperial bodyguards in the palace pretend to be ruffians. It was too fake. It was my first time doing this and I had no experience. Those 7 or 8 imperial bodyguards were clearly flirting with the girl, but when they opened their mouths, it was as if they were going to kill her whole family. The girl was so scared that she almost fainted. She cried and said don't kill her, and she would do anything. In the end, I had no choice but to explain. Guess what? That delicate and pretty girl was not shy at all. She directly asked me if I was married, and the result scared me. I was laughed at by Li Hanlin and the others for half a year. After that, I hired ruffians from the marketplace to act in this kind of show. In advance, we had to agree on how to fight. This kind of wind from the palm strike style was easy to deal with as the price was low. If we used knives, people would have to raise the price. But at that time, I gave money according to my mood. I estimated that no matter how stingy this brother was, he would have spent at least 20 or 30 taels. Yu Dilong and Lu Yunzhong, who were squatting at the entrance of the alley, were also dumbfounded. When the swordsman, who was sweating profusely from just using his palms, finally finished his work, those ruffians followed the rules and shouted things like, "Young swordsman, spare our lives," and "Young swordsman's martial arts are amazing." Then they supported each other and left. Pei Nanwei covered her mouth and laughed, because in her ears, Su Fengnian had already said these words before them. The former head of Beiliang's scourge was full of pride. "How is it? It's all the same, right? I'm the founder of this kind of thing. Back in the day, who knows how many hedonistic sons of rich parents in Liangzhou and Lingzhou learned from me." The white-clothed swordsman, whose back was facing the two, hurriedly took a few deep breaths. When his breathing stabilized, he turned around with a smile and walked towards Su Fengnian and Pei Nanwei. Just as he was about to speak, 2 troublemakers appeared out of nowhere. The taller one of them shouted at the eyesore next to Miss Pei, "Master, mistress, senior brother, and I will find an inn to stay in. Otherwise, we won't be able to sleep on the same bed. Let's go. Su Fengyan saw the two brats run away like a wisp of smoke. His expression was somewhat awkward. Pei Nanwei sneered. You've taken in a good disciple. The white-clothed swordsman in front of them was the newly appointed registrar of Bishan County, Yang Gongshou. When he saw that Su Qi, standing next to the woman he admired, his heart was broken. He had long heard of the beauty of the Rouge woman. Something like, if you marry a wife, you should marry a woman from Lingzhou. If you take a concubine, you should take a Rouge woman. At first, he thought it was just some old lecherous official's dirty talk. However, when he saw the woman who appeared in the yamen, his soul left his body. Later, when he heard that she was already married, he had a painful battle between heaven and man. In the end, he couldn't control himself. Yang Gongshou didn't really want to do anything. He just wanted to find an opportunity to appear in front of her. Later, when he saw that his talent in poetry was useless, he felt that his path might have been wrong. Since Beiliang had a fierce culture, perhaps she liked the path of a great hero. Thus, this happened. Su Fengyan reached out and grabbed Pei Nanwei's slender waist. He smiled and said, This great hero must be a master in Jianghu. Do you have a thunderous nickname? Yang Gongshou opened his mouth slightly. He really forgot about this. However, he did have talent. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become so famous in Green Deer Cave Academy. He cupped his fists and smiled. I am Yang Gongshou. People in Jianghu call me the Sword of Poetry. Not far away, a young scholar clapped his hands and walked over. He laughed and said, Brother Wenfu, when we climbed Green Deer Mountain, we were already panting like a cow halfway up the mountain. I don't know how you managed to achieve great success today. Could it be that you've been possessed by the heavens? Yang Gongshou was exposed. He wanted to dig a hole and hide in it. Luckily, Miss Pei had already left with that person. Yang Gongshou's face was red. In the end, he couldn't say anything vicious. He just snorted coldly. That scholar stood with Yang Gongshou. He looked at the two people's backs as they walked into the alley. He laughed softly and said, A fair and graceful lady is a good match for a gentleman. Brother Wenfu, you and I didn't see eye to eye before. However, after today, your dislike for me has increased greatly. I actually have some good feelings for you. Yang Gongshou flung his sleeves and walked toward the county yamen in large strides. That person smiled and shook his head. Yang Gongshou? Oh, Yang Gongshou, do you really think those two people couldn't see through your clumsy tricks? I'm saving you from being treated like a monkey. Walking in the alley, Su Fengyan smiled and said, Maybe that Yang Gongshou won't appreciate it and will only think that Zhuing is undermining him. Pei Nanwei, who had once been on the Rouge Review board, didn't have any ripples in her heart towards this farce. She said, That Zhuing shouldn't be suitable for officialdom, right? Su Fengyan sighed softly and said, If it was in Liang, unless there was a Bo Lu who had a unique insight and was tolerant of people, Zhuing shouldn't be able to make a name for himself. There is one thing that is very bad about being a scholar. Pei Nanwei asked, Being swayed by emotions. Su Fengyan nodded. Scholars have more feelings than ordinary people. The more they read and know, the more they know about history, and inevitably, their thoughts become heavier. The more talented they are, the weaker their sense of propriety is. They don't like to control the situation. To be precise, it's disdain. They are too lazy to feign civility with people and things. When looking at people and doing things, it's easy to be black and white. That's what you call being swayed by emotions. That's why those literary heroes in history often didn't become officials. This kind of strange phenomenon can't be explained just by having high standards but low ability. Fortunately, this doesn't matter to them. Emperors, generals, and ministers are all just a handful of soil. Only drinkers and poets leave their names behind, drowning their sorrows in wine and writing famous poems. Isn't that great? Thousands of years later, it's naturally easier for people to remember them than those emperors, generals, ministers, and high-ranking officials. The two returned to the courtyard. Pei Nanwei carried two small wooden stools and placed them under the eaves. She looked at him, who was sitting quietly beside her. She said, It's hard to imagine that you're His Royal Highness, the one who killed people in the reed marsh. He didn't say anything. She casually asked, I heard the people on the street say that there's a turning point in Guangling Road. West Chu has been defeated. Do you think Chao Chongqing will make a move? Or wait until the king of Yen goes north? He shook his head. The king of Guangling should be going to accompany the king of Huainan soon. Only then will the king of Yan's army confront Chao Chongqing. She asked, You're willing to come this time and say so much. Are you saying your last words? He didn't say anything again. The two were silent for a long time. In the night, there wasn't much to see. She looked at the sky and finally said, It's rare for a powerful man to treat a woman like a person, right? He said softly, Maybe not a lot, but definitely not a few. It's just that your luck isn't too good and you haven't met one. Pei Nanwei rested her chin on her knees and murmured, But it's not good to not treat a woman like a woman all year long, right? After saying this, she stood up and walked into the room. Her figure was graceful. Chapter 14:14. After dawn, Yu Dilong and Lu Yunzhang left the inn on Luo Street and came to the entrance of the courtyard. They squatted on the left and right like two-door gods. Waiting was really boring. Lu Yunzhang yawned and patted his mouth. He asked casually, Earthworm Yu, do you know what's the most important thing after spring this year? Yu Dilong was wondering if his junior sister, Wang Shang, was used to living with the white fox face. He wondered if she had found one or two brand new famous swords in Beimang and if she had fought with anyone. He didn't hear what Lu Yunzhang, who often claimed to be the loudspeaker of the pugilistic world, was saying. After all, nothing good could come out of Lu Yunzhang's mouth. Yu Dilong didn't understand what Wang Shang meant. Lu Yunzhang was also used to Yu Dilong's absent-mindedness, so he said to himself, In the past, there were a total of 7 reviews for the civil and military reviews, general reviews, and rouge reviews. They would put the military reviews as the finale and put the rouge reviews at the end. This time, the auspicious Talisman Review, which was jointly reviewed by Nailan Yusi and Xie Guaniying, is different. It seems to pay special attention to the civil and military reviews. They actually put the military reviews at the front. Yu Dilong replied, Oh. Lu Yunzhang asked curiously, Aren't you curious about our master's ranking on the martial arts review? Yu Dilong said casually, That's not fair. Doing this when master is seriously injured. If master's ranking isn't good, I'll find trouble with them after Bailiang defeats the Beimang barbarians and I've learned martial arts. Lu Yunzhang rolled his eyes and said, This year, there are a total of 14 people on the martial arts rankings. The 4 grandmasters and the top 10 experts have been reintroduced. Master Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Tai, and Chao Chongqing are known as the world's 4 grandmasters. Next is the top 10 experts. It's said that there's no ranking. Liang has Chun Jibao, Su Yambing, Gu Jiantang, Mount Hui's Shenyuan Qingfeng, and the head of the Wu family's sword tomb. Beimang has Huyan Daguan, Luo Yang, Hong Jingyan, Murong Baoding, and Deng Mao. Yu Dilong frowned. How come that white fox face? The tall Guanyin sect master and the white-browed old man who likes to eat swords are not on the list? I think they're all pretty good. Lu Yunchang joked. In the future, when you find Xie Guanyin and Nailan Yusi, ask them yourself. How would I know why? Yu Dilong nodded his head seriously. Lu Yunzhang said in surprise, Are you really going? Yu Dilong turned to look at him and asked, Do you know what the Sihiyuan anti-pay mentioned is? Lu Yunzhang nodded and said, There are many such courtyards in the Central Plains. They are divided into multiple entrances and exits. Many rich people's mansions are quadrangles. Yu Dilong asked in a low voice, That would cost a lot of silver, right? Lu Yunzhang curled his lips and said, There's only one street in the entire county city, Jade Mountain. If you spend a few taels of silver, you can get it for 40 to 50 taels at most. Yu Dilong said angrily, 45 taels is not enough? Lu Yunzhang, who was carrying the great frost saber on his back, picked his earwax. You're the only one who's short-sighted. As our master's disciple, isn't it easy for you to ask for a courtyard in Mount Qingliang? That place is valuable. Even 10,000 taels of gold can't buy it. Look at how many officials and generals are in Beiliang. Isn't only Deputy Administrator Song Dongming the only one who can have a residence in Mount Qingliang? Yu Dilong sneered. What do you know? Lu Yunzhang retorted. You don't even know shit. Yu Dilong reached out to touch the hilt of his cold saber. Lu Yunzhang suddenly stood up. Yu Dilong, do you really think I'm afraid of you? My great frost saber has long been thirsty for blood. At this moment, Su Fengyan held his waist with one hand and opened the door with the other. When he saw his two disciples at the door at daggers drawn, he said in annoyance, If you want to fight, get lost and fight further away. Yu Dilong looked at his master's complexion and said with guilt and horror, Master, why are you injured again? Could it be that there were Beimang assassins last night? Su Fengyan's expression was strange, and Lu Yunzhang's smile was even stranger. This fellow fawningly said, Master, I'll help you get on the horse later. Don't sprain your waist again. Su Fengyan kicked Lu Yunzhang away from the doorsteps. Take the horse and set off for the Liangzhou Protectorate. Yu Dilong asked cautiously, Master, are you really okay? Su Fengyan put on a stern face and said in all seriousness, There are some defeats that can't be recovered after losing. The older a man is, the more this is the case. Yu Dilong thought carefully. Master is already a grandmaster. It seems the enemy is very powerful. By the way, Master, is Auntie Pei all right? Su Fengyan was about to speak when Lu Yunzhang shouted, Auntie Pei, let's go with Master. Master's waist can't take it anymore. It's difficult for him to get on the horse. Lu Yunzhang mounted his horse and galloped away. Su Fengyan and Yu Dilong mounted their horses one after another. Su Fengyan said with a fake smile, Yu Dilong, go and beat up your junior brother. Yu Dilong clenched his right fist with his left hand and rubbed it fiercely. His face was filled with killing intent. Then, the child asked, Master, what's the reason? Su Fengyan asked, Does eldest senior brother need a reason to beat up youngest junior brother? Yu Dilong spurred his horse and chased after Lu Yunzhang. Su Fengyan looked at the child's back and chuckled. Just like how you miss Wang Sheng. There's no need for a reason. Su Fengyan took a deep breath and looked back at the courtyard. Let's go. The word love does not know where it begins or where it rests, does not know where it begins or how it is resolved, does not know where it ends. From the clan that lived in luxury to Xiangfan City in Qingzhou to northern Liang, where the sky was higher than the central plains. He lived by the shore of Tidehark Lake on Mount Qingliang, and finally came to a poor little county in Yanji County. Like a rootless and weak reed, Pei Nanwei had never felt so at ease even though she had to deal with daily necessities such as rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea. Princess Liang's rouge rating, Princess Liang's rouge rating, and Madame Liang's rouge rating. She lazily got out of bed and made breakfast as usual. Last time, she was busy the whole afternoon for the New Year's Eve dinner. She made 8 or 9 dishes and then placed 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks on the table. She sat at the table and thought about the vegetable garden in the corner and the slightly larger vegetable garden in the back of the courtyard. When would there be a harvest? She thought that after breakfast, she would open the chicken coop and see if there would be a surprise. She thought about the more than 20 taels of silver she got from the county government last night and the more than 30 taels of silver she saved before. According to the price of the masons and carpenters in Bishan County, she could build a decent small courtyard house. Unfortunately, the world in Yuzhou was not peaceful now. If it was last year, she could save a lot of money. Pei Nanwei looked around. Last year, she bought a lot of things for the New Year's Eve. At that time, she was distressed and secretly complained that she shouldn't be so extravagant. Now the price had increased, which made her feel more and more that she was actually quite good at managing the house. Pei Nanwei cleaned up the bowls and chopsticks and said to herself, It doesn't matter if you don't come often. It's good that you can come. So don't die. She suddenly blushed and said softly, What's the number 1 in the world? You still went out rubbing your waist. In the hinterland of Aquarius State in Beimang, the ice and snow melted and everything grew green. A horse galloped along the back of the hillside to the top of the mountain. A girl was running behind the horse. In addition to the huge sword box on her back, she also had many swords tied with hemp ropes. She looked like a Jianghu swindler who sold swords to cheat people. The person sitting high on the horse was an extremely attractive woman. She was Nangong Push, the champion of the last Rouge evaluation. Chun Yu, who was second place, only got the evaluation of not inferior to Nangong. In the new evaluation of the second year of Shangfu, there were more than 14 people in the Wushu evaluation, but there were only 4 people in the Rouge evaluation. This person, who was given the nickname White Fox Face by His Royal Highness, was still on the list. The other 3 people were Chun Yu, who was about to be married to the new king of Liaodong, Zhao Wu, Jiang and I of West Chu, and a woman who was raised in a house and unknown to people called Huyan Guanin. According to the obscure description of the Rouge evaluation, she should be a woman from the grassland of Beimang. In the end, she was kidnapped by Su Fengyan, the king of Beiliang, and kept as a mistress. Chapter 14-15. Ever since Wang Shang entered Beimang, she had been running behind Mr. Nangong. Many times she had to stop and was required to run her qi. The girl had fainted 7 or 8 times. She was like a smart child who met the most demanding private school teacher, who wanted the child to recite the classics in her sleep, regardless of whether it would spoil the growth or not. It should be noted that except for the red sandalwood sword case, Wang Shang's other famous swords could only slightly hide the sword qi in their scabbards. Every time the girl was exhausted and her qi was disordered, the unruly famous swords of the past would come out to add fuel to the fire. The thin sword Moose Fish, the 3-inch blade dogwood forged by the Confucian sage of the old northern Han, the Taoist talisman sword, Yellow Crane, the sword that pierced through the abdomen of the emperor of Dongyue in the past, the Xiaojiao with the tip of the sword exhaled like spring thunder, the Yuyu sword that clashed with the sword qi of other famous swords, and the goose yellow sword that was as lively as a girl in love. The sword case and the 7 swords made Wang Shang look like a funny hedgehog. As she and Elder Nangong headed north, there was no lack of discerning northern Mang experts who wanted to kill and rob them. Elder Nangong never cared if the young girl could deal with them or not, always watching with folded arms. Only when Wang Shang was injured by sword energy that was like a flood bursting through a dike would he save the young girl. Then, he would tail those extremely unlucky northern Mang martial practitioners from a distance that was neither too far nor too close. Every time the young girl leisurely woke up, she would be thrown into the battlefield by Elder Nangong, repeating this process until Wang Shang successfully killed someone. Before this, in eastern Jinzhou, the two had encountered a Beimang cavalry of more than 1,000 people. Mr. Nangong also threw her directly into the battlefield. Wang Shang, who could only control 3 or 4 swords at most, was in a frenzy and killed more than 300 Beimang cavalrymen with 7 swords. Her life was hanging by a thread. When she was about to use all the swords in the sword case, Mr. Nangong rushed into the battlefield and knocked her unconscious. When Wang Shang woke up, she found that the Beimang barbarians were all dead and Mr. Nangong, whose clothes were as clean as new, was standing among the corpses. On the top of the mountain, Bai Hu led the horse and looked into the distance. She asked, "Do you know why the saber is always inferior to the sword?" Wang Shang shook his head. If her master wanted her to practice the sword, then she would practice the sword. His master had once said that he was the best sword embryo in the world, and that it would be a pity if he didn't practice the sword. In fact, Wang Shang felt somewhat regretful. Although his master often used swords, his master's martial path had begun with saber training. Therefore, Wang Shang would occasionally envy the glib-tongued Lu Yunzhong, especially when she heard that Elder Nangong, who wore the Spring Thunder embroidered winter twin sabers on his waist, had once given a saber to her master who had traveled the Jianghu twice. This made the young girl even more reluctant to tell others. Bai Hu patted Wang Shang's head and said softly, "People are afraid of being serious, and things are afraid of being serious. Wang Shang, if you don't want to be his dispensable disciple for the rest of your life, then think about this problem carefully." Although Wang Shang did not understand, he still nodded his head out of habit. Bai Hu smiled and said, "There are millions of swords in the world, and they all have a master. As long as you can defeat her in the future, your master will have a whole new level of respect for you. In this world, there has never been a woman who has become the most powerful person in the world. Wang Sheng exclaimed in surprise and said timidly, Elder Nangong, are you talking about that West Chu princess with the surname Jiang? But she has been able to fly on her sword for a long time. I can't defeat her, right? And I heard that she's really good-looking. Bai Huer sighed and said, You silly girl. Wang Sheng tiptoed slightly and fastened the few loose swords tightly. He then looked up and smiled at Elder Nangong and said, Sir, if my master is no longer the most powerful person in the world in the future, you can take his place. Bai Huer patted the young girl's head and said helplessly, You're really silly. Wang Sheng hesitated for a moment and finally plucked up the courage to ask, Sir, can I ask you a question? Bai Huer said softly, You want to ask why you came to Beimang? Wang Sheng nodded slightly. The most beautiful woman in the world raised her head slightly and laughed heartily. Wang Sheng, do you know what realm I'm in? I'm still stuck at the mysterious finger level. When I left the tide-listening pavilion, it's not that I couldn't reach the celestial state, nor that I couldn't become a master in the next martial arts evaluation. It's just that, to me, as long as I'm not the most powerful person in the world, it's meaningless. Bai Huer loosened the reins and gently pressed her hands on the hilts of the spring thunder and winter embroidered sabers. He took a step forward and said, Just one more step. This was the first time the young girl Wang Sheng saw Elder Nangong in such high spirits. It was really beautiful. The Dongyue sword pool had countless engravings on the legendary cliff. Among them, the two words sword pool, in the ancient seal script of the Great Qin dynasty, and deep water, high mountain, long sword chi, written by Chao Sheng of the Dafeng dynasty, were the most charming. Beside the sword pool there were mountains and rocks. The water in the pool was green and the water rose and fell. The height of the water varied throughout the year. However, what was special about the sword pool was that during the rainy seasons of spring and summer, the water level of the sword pool would decrease and fall. The 7 words, deep water, high mountain, long sword chi, could be seen from top to bottom. On the contrary, during the second half of the rootless heavenly water season, the height of the water did not drop the word deep, leaving only the solitary word water in sight. The Song family of the sword pool had existed for more than 600 years, much longer than the Dongyue kingdom. However, ever since the Wu family's sword tomb appeared, the sword pool, a holy land of swords, had become a place of regret in the eyes of many. Unlike the Wu family's sword tomb, which worshipped ancient swords, the Song family had persisted in the principle of the old man is better than the new sword, but the new sword is better than the old in the hands of the previous grandmaster, Song Yanqing. Every swordsman of the Song family who had achieved success in swordsmanship had to throw his old sword into the sword pool before leaving for Jianghu and personally go to the sword furnace to forge a new sword. Outsiders had always been puzzled by this and felt that it was a beautiful wish of the old man, the new sword. After Song Yanqing's death, Chai Qingshan, who had once been the guest of Prince Zhao Yi of Guangling, returned to the sword pool after being expelled. This grandmaster of swordsmanship, who had never had a disciple, had finally, belatedly, taken in 2 disciples. The young man was a brilliant disciple of the Song family, and the young girl was an unpolished jade covered in dust. The 3 of them stood on a huge rock of the spring god, lake in the sword pool, that was engraved with the words, The Enemy of 10,000. The rock was as large as a small mountain, square and extremely majestic. The old man without a sword lowered his head and looked at the deep and ancient spring water. His voice was hoarse as he said, My senior brother was defeated by Li Chungang back then. He didn't commit suicide, but rather he died from injuries. The family head, Song Yanqing, had died in the pugilistic world outside the sword pool last year. It wasn't because he had died of old age, but because he had used all of his 14 new swords. He had even sacrificed his life to use a sword at the level of an earth immortal. However, he was still killed openly. I'm telling you these 2 things because I want you to understand one thing. Other than the sword tomb of the Wu family, there are many swordsmen who don't care about the sword pool. There are many more than you can imagine. Chai Qingshan probably felt that this truth was too cruel for the 2 children. He laughed and said self-deprecatingly, Other than an old man like me, the sword pool has a reputation in Jianghu. You should call him senior brother, Li Yibai. He has no hope of reaching the peak of swordsmanship. Compared to people of the same age like Wu Luding of the Sword Tomb, swordsman Sui Hua and Qi Xianxia of Longhu Mountain, the gap is not only in swordsmanship and sword moves, but also in vision and breadth of mind. So you are the last seeds of the sword pool. Tell me, is there anyone you must surpass when practicing swordsmanship? The youth with a jade-like face had a lively personality. He smiled brightly and said, "First, senior brother Li Yibai, then you, master. After that, we will go to the sword tomb of the Wu family and look for Dong Tai. If we can't find him, we will go to Bailiang." At this point, the youth pointed at the girl beside him and complained, "Master, junior sister is no different from many of the girls in the sword pool. She secretly admires the king of Bailiang, Su Fengnian. Every time we gather and talk about that guy, they, TSK, their eyes are like the water of the pool under our feet, green and shiny. Master, this is too outrageous. That guy surnamed Su is the mortal enemy of our sword pool. In any case, there isn't a man in the sword pool who doesn't want to use a sword to kill Su Fengnian." The girl's delicate face flushed red. She flew into a rage out of humiliation and shouted, "Song Tinglu, shut your stinky mouth. No one will treat you as a mute." Then, the girl looked at her master guiltily, afraid that she would make her master unhappy. Chai Qingshan dismissed it with a smile and said with emotion, "It's not a bad thing that love lasts for a long time. Su Fengnian, has he become the Li Chungang in the hearts of my generation?" At this moment, an old woman with white hair and vicissitudes of life staggered over. Chai Qingshan and the youth walked down from the boulder. The youth ran over to help the old woman and shouted with a smile, "Great-grandmother, are you here to enjoy the scenery while the sun is good?" The old woman stroked the youth's head with a kind gaze. "Tinglu, remember to learn the sword well from your master. You have to be diligent. As for whether you can master it or not, it's up to you. Remember, if you go out in the future, you have to come home properly." Chai Qingshan nodded in greeting. The old woman smiled and nodded. After the three of them left, the old woman sat by the pool with a serene bearing. She smiled and said, "Nianqing, I used to wait for you. I waited for many years and many times. No matter how long it took, I would always be able to wait for you to come home." She folded her skinny hands on her knees. Her red hair from back then had gradually turned white. In her life, she was used to staring at his back. The words between husband and wife might not even be as much as the teachings between husband and disciple. Every time he left the sword pool and returned to the sword pool, she would stand at the entrance of the sword pool. He never looked at her. She did not regret it. Chapter 14:16. The old man closed his eyes and murmured, "Nianqing, now you're the one waiting for me." In Jiangnan's water town, there were many small bridges and flowing water. The young man, nicknamed Bamboo, wandered the streets of the town for an entire day before returning home in the dusk. His mother had closed the cloth shop and was preparing food at home. The young man buried his head in eating. The woman who had brought her son to this town the year before last said softly, "Eat slowly. No one will steal from you." The young man only cared about wolfing down the food. The woman smiled. "Your brother one is already married. I don't expect you to find a good girl like the young lady of the Liu family. It's fine if you can just kidnap one back." The young man's mouth was full of food as he mumbled, I know. She sighed. "Don't just stay outside all day doing nothing. I don't want you to earn money. It's just that it's not good for a man to always be doing nothing. When a woman marries, she always likes to find a man who has work to do. Even if she's poor at the beginning, she'll have something to look forward to. Her days will be more comfortable." The young man suddenly slammed the bowl in his hand onto the table. His face was full of anger as he roared, "Yes, I'm not doing proper work, but even if I'm like my father, what's the use? My father is famous for being an honest man. Isn't he? Anyone who does farm work would give him a thumbs up, right? What's the result? Didn't he leave us behind for so many years? We don't even know if he's dead or not. If he comes back one day, I won't recognize him as my father. Bastard. Her eyes were red. She was originally a gentle woman. Although her voice trembled, she said with an unquestionable attitude, "You're not allowed to talk about your father like that." The young man got up and left the stool. He squatted at the door and sulked. The woman turned her head and secretly wiped her tears with her sleeve. After clearing away the bowls and chopsticks, she carried a small stool to the door and said softly, "I'll warm the food for you in the pot. When you want to eat, just let me know." The young man lowered his head and choked out, "Mother, I don't want to get angry at you. I'm just complaining about my father. He let you down." The woman smiled and said, "How did your father let your mother down? Your father, ever since he knew me, has never said a harsh word to me, nor has he lost his temper once. For so many years, the crops have been taken care of by him alone. He has never allowed me to work in the fields, not even once. Every time he went to the market in town, he didn't forget to bring back some hairpins, rouge, and other small things. Back then, I complained that he was wasting money. Every time your father said he understood, he understood. But every time your father would still buy them. Your mother, I only complained about your father verbally, but I liked him in my heart. Which girl in the village doesn't envy your mother for marrying into a good family?" The young man said angrily, "It's my father's fortune to be able to marry you. He should love my mother so much." The woman smiled and stroked her son's head. "When you find a wife in the future, you have to treat her as well." The young man was still resentful. "Anyway, he's definitely not like my father. Once he left, there was no news of him for several years. He didn't even know how to send a letter home." The woman smiled gently and didn't say anything. The young man suddenly said, "Mother, Brother Wenhua said that I shouldn't mingle in the pugilistic world. He said that when he has saved enough money, he can buy that restaurant from the shopkeeper around this autumn. In the future, he wants me to help him do odd jobs, and I agree." The woman said happily, "That's a good thing. You know so many friends, but only your brother Wenhua truly cares for you. In the future, when you help him with things, put in more effort. Don't think too much about money. Your father said that we humans can't climb out of money once we fall into it. That's the life of a lifetime of hard work. It looks like we don't have to worry about food and clothing, but it's actually not comfortable." The young man smiled. "Hey, my father can say such things?" The woman pretended to hit him. The young man suddenly asked, "My father's name is Wang Mingyin?" The woman, who was just pretending to give her son a chestnut, now really hit her son's forehead. She laughed angrily and said, "How can a son call his father's name directly?" The young man smiled and said, "Mother, let me tell you, there used to be a man called Wang Mingyin in the Jianghu. He was very powerful. His brother was Wang Mingyang, who guarded Shangfan City for 10 years. He was the only high-ranking official that even the prince of northern Liang couldn't do anything about. Wang Mingyang himself was also very powerful. He was the 11th martial arts master in the world. The Wang family of the two brothers was even more terrifying. I've heard of a scholarly saying, 'generations of Zhan-ing.' It probably means that many generations of the family were high-ranking officials and dignitaries. Mother, do you want to hear about the Jianghu deeds of the guy with the same name as our father?" The woman shook her head and smiled. "I don't want to hear about it." The young man looked at the sky and stood up. "Brother Wen said yesterday that he asked me to find him for a drink when I have time. It seems that he heard something happy. I'll go now." The woman hurriedly stood up. "Bring some cloth." The young man rolled his eyes. "Brother Wen doesn't care about this." The woman glared at him. "It's good that he doesn't care. Our Wang family has to put ourselves in his shoes." The young man made a face. "That's what my father said too, right?" The woman went to the inner room and brought back 2 pieces of cloth. She handed them to her son. After drinking, walked slowly on the way home. The young man took the cloth and left the house as fast as he could, saying that he knew. The woman saw that her son didn't close the door. She shook her head helplessly and went to close it. When she was about to bolt the door, she paused. In the end, she didn't completely close the door. She turned and walked into the house. "Mingyin, your son has grown up. He's like you." On the Great Snow Plateau of Mount Hui, the Shenyuan family's reputation couldn't reach the top of Jianghu even in the hands of Shenyuan Great Plate. Now, not only had it suppressed the Taoist master's mansion of Longhu Mountain, it could even look down on the Dongyue sword pool. In the whole world, perhaps only the Wu family's sword tomb could be on par with it. All of this was attributed to the woman in purple who was in charge of the Moonless Tower. Countless Jianghu heroes willingly prostrated themselves under her purple clothes. When she had a place in the martial arts review, the Great Snow Plateau, which had become the newest holy land in Jianghu, was even more crowded. There were so many mountaineers that it was impossible for people to go down the mountain. When her name didn't appear in the Rouge Review, countless young chivalrous men in purple who admired her felt injustice. They clamored that they would teach Nalin Yusi and Xie Guaniying a lesson. The former fourth prince, who was now the emperor, had come to visit but was refused at the door. In addition, the king of Beiliang had asked the Fish Dragon gang to escort the books in the Tide Listening Pavilion Martial Library to Mount Hui. These two things undoubtedly had great influence on the Jianghu people who liked to make groundless accusations. Many people speculated that the reason why the emperor didn't like Su Fanyan so much was not only because of the old grudge between the previous emperor and the vassal kings of Beiliang, but also because of jealousy. This kind of wild speculation, which was originally sneered at by the Liang officialdom, began to gain a firm foothold after the emperor personally sent people to the Moonless Tower of Mount Hui with the inscription, "Invincible in the world." The whole Jianghu had a better impression of the new emperor, who was famous for his various literary and administrative actions after ascending the throne. After all, the two previous emperors of Liang were both iron-fisted monarchs who liked to pass on the Jianghu. The current emperor didn't treat the Jianghu people kindly, but at the very least, he didn't have any deep hatred for them. This was worth celebrating even if it wasn't the new year. Shenyuan Qingfeng stood under an old cassia tree. After Mount Hui's chief guest, Huang Fangfua, left the mountain, and the purple-clothed woman, who was the Mount Hui mountain master and the Wulin alliance leader, was obsessed with martial arts. Huang Fangfua, who had reached the Finger Mystery Realm, became more and more powerful. However, even though he was second only to one person and above tens of thousands of people in Mount Hui, Huang Fangfua was more cautious than before. He didn't dare to cross the line. In the past, in order to increase her realm, she had absorbed the internal energy of countless Jianghu masters. Her cruel methods were even worse than those so-called Jianghu devils. The latter would at least pay attention to the fact that a rabbit doesn't eat the grass near its burrow. She had started from killing the retainers of Mount Hui from the very beginning. Only when no one was worthy of her attention did she target the masters outside the mountain. Now, after the battle with Wang Xianji, her martial arts attainment and realm had improved by leaps and bounds. Some of the secret manuals sent by the Tide Listening Pavilion made her even more powerful. Shenyuan Qingfeng asked calmly, "How many second-grade masters are there on the mountain?" Huang Fangfua replied respectfully, "There are 6 people willing to serve Mount Hui. There are 11 people who are only willing to add flowers to the brocade." Shenyuan Qingfeng sneered, "Flowers to the brocade?" Huang Fangfua felt a chill all over his body. Shenyuan Qingfeng kept her hands behind her back. She raised her head and looked at the leaves of the cassia tree. Her tone turned gentle. Flowers to the brocade, charcoal in the snow, frost in the snow, oil in the fire, cotton in the wind, and a knife in the heart. Then, she mocked herself. "What kind of woman do you think I am?" Of course, Huang Fangfua wasn't naive enough to think that she was talking to him. He left silently. She waited until Huang Fangfua was far away. "At that time, you used the luck of the Imperial Jade Seal to help me stabilize my realm. I didn't accompany you to Xinwu City to deal with Han Shengxian. But later, Wang Xianji went to find trouble with you. We don't owe each other anything anymore. Now I have Zhao Huangchao and useless monk's martial arts experience. I don't need those boxes of secret manuals at all. Do you want to do a big deal with me again?" Shenyuan Qingfeng was silent for a moment. "Or do you think we're even?" Dunhuang City. In a hidden house that no one cared about, a plump woman bent down to protect a toddler